The most feared alpha in the known world, the man who had made 7 alphas kneel and 3 entire packs dissolve with a single letter, was currently drooling on Nora Voss's left shoulder, and she couldn't move. Not because she was frozen with awe, not because she was under some spell, but because 31 High Council members, 6 war generals, and 1 very horrified beta were all staring at her from across the Grand Hall, like she had personally committed treason, and not one of them was brave enough to wake him up. Chapter 1. Nobody sits in the neutral chair. Nora had been in Kael Donmir's war hall for exactly 47 minutes before everything went catastrophically wrong. She needed to be precise about that, 47 minutes, because later, when people asked her how it happened, she wanted to have her timeline clean. She wanted to be able to say, "I did everything right for 47 minutes. The 48th minute was not my fault." It had started, as most disasters in Nora's life did, with a seating arrangement. The Great Hall of Donmir Keep was built for intimidation. She understood that the moment she walked in, the ceilings were deliberately too high, so that your voice disappeared upward and never came back. The long obsidian table seated 40, and was always kept cold. She didn't know how, she didn't want to know how, so that every time your fingers brushed the surface, your body reminded you, you are small here. The chairs on either side were assigned. Everyone in the werewolf world with half a brain knew that. Pack allegiance, treaty status, blood rank, all of it was encoded in where you sat at Kael Donmir's table. Nora had no allegiance, no treaty status, no blood rank to speak of. She was a territory mediator from the unbound, the polite term for wolves who belonged to no pack, paid taxes to no alpha, and existed in the gray edges of the werewolf world, doing the jobs that pack wolves considered beneath them, translating disputes, carrying messages across borders, sitting in rooms where everyone hated each other and trying to make sure nobody started bleeding before an agreement was signed. She was, in short, a nobody. A very competent nobody, but still. Which was precisely why, when she'd arrived and the hall was already full, the only available seat had been the one at the dead center of the table, the one with no name placard, the one that sat slightly apart from the rest, as if it had been positioned that way on purpose, the one that 3 different people had tried to warn her about before she sat down, but she'd been late. Her notes had been scattered everywhere, and she hadn't caught a single word of what they'd said. Nobody sits in, she'd sat. The silence that followed had been the specific kind of silence that meant she'd made a terrible mistake, but everyone was too afraid to say so out loud. She'd arranged her papers, uncapped her pen, looked up. 30 pairs of eyes, staring. "Is this?" she started. "It's fine," said the beta, standing at the head of the room. His name was Aldrich. He was approximately the size of a small car and had the expression of a man watching someone step onto a frozen lake he knew would crack. "Please, it's fine. Stay seated." So she stayed seated. And for 47 minutes, everything was fine. The High Council convened. Territorial maps were unrolled. 3 border disputes were presented with the kind of careful diplomatic language that meant everyone in the room actually wanted to tear someone's throat out. Nora took notes. She translated 2 passages from the old tongue when the council's own translator fumbled. She made herself small and useful and invisible. 47 minutes. She was good at this. And then the doors at the far end of the hall opened. She'd heard about Kael Donmir the way everyone in the werewolf world had heard about him. In pieces, each piece slightly more impossible than the last. That he'd claimed his alpha title at 19 after a challenge that lasted 4 minutes and ended with his opponent walking away with a permanent limp and a permanent change of heart about the whole thing. That he'd dissolved the Ashvale pack, a pack 3,000 strong, not with force but with a single letter whose contents had never been made public, but which had resulted in all 3,000 members voluntarily relocating within a week. That he hadn't slept in the same room twice in over 2 years. Not paranoia, people said, but protocol. That he'd once walked into a summit between 4 feuding alphas, said 11 words, and walked out with a signed treaty and 4 alphas who looked like they'd been mildly concussed. She'd expected something enormous, something that took up space the way a thunderstorm took up space. What walked through the door was, instead, just a man. Tall, yes. Dark-haired, with the kind of exhaustion built into his face that didn't come from one bad night, but from 100 of them stacked on top of each other. He wore no ceremonial rank markers, just a plain dark jacket, collar open at the throat. His jaw was sharp enough to use as a letter opener. His eyes, when they swept the room, were a very specific shade of gray-green that Nora's brain, annoyingly, chose to register as striking before it registered anything else. He moved the way dangerous things moved, not fast, not tense, just certain, like the floor expected him. He came down the length of the hall. Every person at the table either straightened or became very interested in their notes. He didn't acknowledge any of them. He was heading for the chair at the center of the table, the one Nora was sitting in. She became aware of this fact approximately 4 steps before he reached it. Her notes suddenly looked wrong. Her pen felt enormous in her hand. She started to stand. "Don't." His voice was low, not aggressive, just the kind of voice that made your body respond before your brain could weigh in on whether it should. She sat back down. He pulled out the chair to her immediate right, not a seat she'd noticed before, slightly angled toward the center, and sat. Aldrich, who had been holding the posture of a man waiting for an explosion, exhaled approximately 1/3 of the air in his lungs and carefully did not look at Nora. The meeting resumed. Cale Donmere did not take notes. He didn't look at the maps. He watched the council members the way she'd once watched a chess player watch the board, not following the pieces but reading the players. Nora kept taking notes. She kept her eyes on her paper. She tried very hard not to think about the fact that 6 inches to her right was the most powerful werewolf alive, and he smelled. She clocked this involuntarily, the way all wolves clocked scent, like rain-soaked cedar and something older, something mineral and dark, like stone after lightning. She wrote, Border Clause 7, contested by Veth delegation. She underlined it twice for absolutely no reason. She did not look at him. 20 minutes passed. The council was deep in the Veth border dispute now, voices rising slightly, 2 of the generals starting to argue about historical precedent. Nora tracked the argument, made her notes, reached the bottom of her page, and flipped to a new one. That was when she noticed something. The man to her right had gone very still. Not alert still, not listening still. She knew the different kinds of stillness. You learned them quickly, working as a mediator. Alert stillness had a quality of readiness to it, a coiled energy. Grieving stillness was heavy, pressed down. This stillness was different. This was the stillness of someone fighting something. She didn't look directly, just took him in from the corner of her eye, the way you watched a fire you weren't sure was contained. His shoulders had dropped, barely, but enough. His head had inclined, just slightly, toward her. His eyes were, she couldn't tell, from this angle. Half open, maybe. His hands on the table had gone flat and still. The argument across the table got louder. 2 voices, then 3, overlapping. She turned back to her notes. She wrote, General Cavan disputes the 1887 territorial... Something pressed against her left shoulder. Warm, heavy, present. She stopped writing. The thing pressing against her shoulder was his head. Cale Donmere, the man who had dissolved a pack of 3,000 with a letter, the man 7 alphas had knelt to, the most feared predator in the known werewolf world, was asleep on her shoulder. She knew it immediately. She'd spent enough years reading bodies to know the difference between leaning and gone. He was gone. His breathing had slowed and deepened. His weight had settled. He was fully, completely, deeply asleep. In the middle of a high council session, on a stranger's shoulder, on her shoulder. She did not move. Across the table, General Cavan had stopped mid-sentence. He was staring. The delegate to her left was staring. Aldrich, at the head of the table, had gone the specific shade of gray that meant he was computing consequences and not enjoying any of them. One by one, the voices stopped. 31 people staring at her in total silence. Nora looked back at them. She looked down at the man asleep on her shoulder. She looked back up at them. She mouthed, very carefully, What do I do? No one moved. Aldrich's jaw was doing something complicated. One of the junior council members looked like he was trying to remember how to breathe. She mouthed again, Is this normal? The answer, from 31 faces, was a unanimous and silent, absolutely not. Right. She slowly, carefully, put down her pen. She straightened her spine as much as she could without disturbing the weight on her shoulder. She placed her hands flat on the table, and she sat there. Because there was, in the end, nothing else she could do. The weight of him was extraordinary. Not just physical, though he was solidly, substantially built in the way of all alpha wolves. Muscle layered over muscle, a body designed for surviving things. But something more than that. There was a quality to it. A specific gravitational realness, like holding something that didn't usually let itself be held. She stared at the wall across from her. The council members stared at her. Aldrich was writing something, very fast, on a small piece of paper. He folded it in half and passed it down the table with the careful efficiency of a man who had served powerful people long enough to know that problems needed to be managed quietly. The paper reached her in 30 seconds. She opened it. Do not wake him. Do not move. Do not speak unless spoken to. He has not slept in 6 days. You may have just saved his life. I will explain later. As she read it twice. 6 days. She folded the paper back up. She put it under her notes. On her shoulder, Cale Donmere breathed in slowly, breathed out. His exhale was warm against the side of her neck. Her wolf, the instinctive animal part of her that usually sat quiet and dormant, since she'd spent years working with dominant wolves and long ago trained herself not to react to dominance cues, did something she'd never felt it do before. It went calm. Not still. Not suppressed. Genuinely, actively calm. Like something settling into a position it had been trying to find for a long time. She found this alarming. She focused on the wall. Aldrich, with the composure of a man who had managed crises before and would manage them again, quietly resumed the session. His voice dropped to a register that was functional without being loud, managing the room around the sleeping alpha like water moving around a stone. The council members took their cue from him, reluctantly, and the session continued in a muted, surreal half-key. Nora took notes. She didn't know what else to do. Her left hand was cramping slightly from holding still, but she didn't shift. Her shoulder ached from the weight and the angle, but she didn't move. She wrote Border Clause 7, General Cavan's objection, revised language proposed by Aldrich, and she did not think about the warmth against her neck, or the extraordinary specific quiet of him against her, or the fact that her wolf was making soft, bewildering sounds inside her chest, like something that had just come home. She thought about nothing. She took notes for 40 minutes. And when Cale Donmere finally stirred, a slow, gradual surfacing, a deepened breath, a fraction of tension returning to the weight on her shoulder, she had her pen down and her face forward, and her expression neutral before his head lifted. He raised his head. She felt him realize. The stillness that came over him in that moment was different from the sleeping stillness. This one had weight to it, a density. It lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then he straightened, put both hands flat on the table, looked forward. Around him, no one looked back. Aldrich said, without missing a beat, "We've reached Clause 12 of the Veth revision. The northern boundary remains contested." A pause. "Show me the map." Cale's voice was the same as before, low, certain, but there was something slightly roughened in it, the edge of waking. He reached for the map that was slid toward him, and his eyes moved across it, and he was, in 45 seconds, fully present in the room. Not one word about what had just happened. Not one look in her direction. She picked her pen back up. She wrote, "Northern boundary. Veth delegation. Contested." Her hand was not shaking. She was very proud of that. The session ended 20 minutes later. People filed out. She gathered her notes. She did not make eye contact with anyone. She was almost at the door, 15 feet, 10 feet, when a hand closed around her wrist. Not hard, just definitive. She stopped. The hall had emptied. Aldrich stood near the door, which he closed as he stepped out, leaving them alone in the high-ceilinged room with its cold obsidian table and its too tall ceiling that swallowed sound. She turned around. Cale Donmere was looking at her. Not at her the way he'd looked at the map. Differently. Like the map and she were entirely different categories of thing, that required different kinds of attention. She waited. "You didn't move," he said. "No." "You sat there for 40 minutes." "Yes." He studied her. His eyes in this light were less gray-green and more simply gray, the particular gray of overcast sky right before it decided what kind of storm it wanted to be. "Who are you?" he asked. "Nora Voss. I'm a territory mediator. Unbound." Something shifted in his expression. Not much. The unbound mediator who translated the old tongue passages earlier. "Yes." Another silence. He released her wrist. She noticed, catalogued, filed away, that he did it slowly, not dropping her hand. Releasing it. "You'll come back tomorrow," he said. It was not a question. She thought about saying no. She thought about several things. "All right," she said. He nodded once, turned back to the table. She left. It was not until she was outside, in the cold air of the Dawnmere courtyard, that she allowed herself to lean against the stone wall, tip her head back, close her eyes, and say, quietly, to absolutely no one, what just happened. Her wolf, warm and absurdly content somewhere in her chest, did not answer. But it was smiling. Chapter 2. He doesn't invite people. Ever. She came back. She told herself it was professional. She was a mediator. She had been hired for this summit. She had notes to finish, clauses to translate, a job to complete. The fact that the most feared alpha in the known world had personally told her to return was simply a logistical detail, a scheduling note, nothing more. She told herself this 4 times between her quarters and the keep gate, and believed it less each time. Aldrich met her at the entrance. He looked like a man who had spent the night making calculations and hadn't liked any of the answers. He was tall, broad, copper-skinned, with close-cropped gray at his temples, and the permanently braced posture of someone who managed catastrophe for a living. He looked at her the way you looked at a variable you hadn't accounted for. "Nora Voss," he said. "Aldrich," she said. "He asked for you by name this morning. He said it the way you'd say the building is on fire. Factual, calm, deeply concerned. He asked Fen to find out your full name, your pack history, your mediator registration number, and whether you were planning to return." She absorbed this. "And Fen is his head of intelligence." A pause. "He doesn't ask Fen about people. Fen asks Fen about people, and then tells him what he needs to know. The Alpha has never once, in 4 years of my service, asked for a specific individual to be researched by name before that person had done anything noteworthy." "I sat still," Nora said. "That's all I did." Aldrich looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he said, "that's all you did." He said it like it explained everything, which clarified nothing, which she suspected was intentional. He led her inside. She expected to be taken back to the Great Hall. Instead, Aldrich walked her through a corridor she hadn't been in before. Narrower, quieter, lit by sconces instead of the high windows, and stopped in front of a door that was notable only for how unremarkable it was. Plain dark wood. No crest. No guard. "He's in here," Aldrich said. She waited for more. More didn't come. "This isn't the war hall," she said. "No. So this is his working study." Aldrich paused. Then, with the careful precision of a man choosing to give her exactly one piece of important information, "He doesn't bring people here. I want you to understand that before you go in. Not generals, not council members, not delegates from allied packs." Another pause. "Not anyone." Nora looked at the door. "But he asked for me," she said. "He asked for you," Aldrich confirmed, with the tone of a man who had reconciled himself to a thing he didn't fully understand. He reached past her and knocked twice. A specific pattern, she noticed, not random, then stepped back. "I'll be in the hall outside if you need. Come in." The voice from inside was immediate, like he'd been standing near the door. She looked at Aldrich one more time. He gave her nothing. She pushed the door open and went in. The study was nothing like the war hall. The war hall was built for fear. This room was built for, she searched for the word, endurance. Bookshelves covered 2 full walls, not decorative, actually used. The spines cracked and color faded. A large desk dominated the center. buried under maps and open correspondence, and stacked documents with the organized chaos of someone who worked hard and fast and didn't stop long enough to file things. A fire burned in the grate on the far wall. 2 chairs faced it, old ones, leather gone soft at the armrests, the kind of chairs that had been sat in so many times they'd shaped themselves around the person. He was standing at the window. He turned when she entered. In the war hall, under ceremony and surveillance, he'd been formidable. In this room, in the gray morning light with no audience and no table between them, he was something else. Still formidable. That was structural, built into him, not a performance, but also just a person. Standing in a room with too many books and a fire that was burning slightly too hot, and exhaustion that sat on him like a second coat. He looked like he hadn't slept again. She registered this and said nothing. "Sit," he said, nodding toward the chairs by the fire. She sat. He crossed the room and sat in the other chair. Not the desk chair, the fire chair, the worn one, close enough to her that she was acutely aware of the distance between them as a specific and measured thing. He didn't speak immediately. She didn't fill the silence. This was a professional skill she'd developed over years of mediation. The ability to sit in silence without making it awkward, to let it belong to whoever needed it most. He seemed to notice. "You're comfortable with quiet," he said. "It's useful in my work." "Most people fill silence," he said, "especially around me. Most people are nervous around you." "And you're not?" She thought about lying. Decided against it. He'd know, she suspected, the way dominant wolves always knew. "I'm moderately terrified," she said, "but I find that terror and silence aren't mutually exclusive." Something happened in his expression. Not a smile, not quite. But the geography of his face shifted slightly, the way a landscape shifts when light hits it from a new angle. "Why did you stay still yesterday?" he asked. She'd expected this question, had composed several answers for it during the walk here. She gave him the true one instead. "Because Aldrich told me not to move, and because—" She paused. "Because you looked like you needed it." Silence. "That's all?" he said. "That's all." He watched her. The fire popped once. Outside the window she could hear the faint movement of the keep. Guards, she supposed, or staff. A muffled world that made this room feel sealed off from it. "I don't sleep," he said. She waited. Not easily, not well. Rarely in company, never in a session, never. He stopped. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "What happened yesterday does not happen. I need you to understand that before you form whatever conclusions people form when they observe something like that." "I haven't formed any conclusions," she said. "Everyone forms conclusions." "I formed a note," she said. "On my notepad. It said Northern Boundary, Veth Delegation, contested. That's the conclusion I walked out with." She looked at him steadily. "Whatever else happened in that room was yours to keep." The silence this time was different. Longer. She watched him process something, watched it move through him the way weather moved through open space. 6 days, he said finally, quietly. She remembered Aldrich's note. "He has not slept in 6 days." "I know," she said. "Aldrich told me." "It's been longer," he said. "Not 6 days without sleeping entirely. That would kill a wolf, even me. But 6 days without—" He stopped again. She watched him choose a word and discard it, choose another. "Without rest. There's a difference. You can sleep and not rest. You can close your eyes for 4 hours and wake up feeling like you've been running from something the entire time." She understood this. She didn't say so yet. "Yesterday," he said, "was the first time in—" Another pause, this one longer. "A long time, that I actually rested." She held this information carefully, the way you held something fragile. "On my shoulder," she said, not mockingly, just precisely. "On your shoulder," he confirmed, and something in his voice made her understand this was not easy for him to say. The most feared alpha in the known world, cataloging his vulnerabilities. "I don't know why. I need you to know. I don't know why, because I don't want you to think I do, and am not telling you." "All right." "It may have been the scent," he said. He was watching her carefully now. gauging her reaction with those gray storm eyes. Certain scents can function as anchors. For wolves who have difficulty with, he didn't finish it. She finished it for him, inside her own head, with feeling safe. That makes sense, she said, keeping her voice neutral. I work with a lot of dominant wolves, high-ranking betas, alphas in mediation sometimes. I've been told my scent is, she searched for the right word, unthreatening. That's not the word I'd use, he said. She didn't ask what word he would use. The fire settled. He reached forward and moved one of the logs with the iron poker, not because it needed moving, she suspected, but because he needed something to do with his hands. She noticed that his hands, large, long-fingered, marked with the faint white traces of old scars across the knuckles, were not entirely steady. Not shaking, just not entirely steady. How long, she thought, does it take to unravel a person? How many nights of not resting before the hands give it away? I'd like to ask you something, she said. He looked up from the fire. And I want you to know that you can say no, and I will accept that without any reaction or professional awkwardness, or ask, he said. She took a breath. Is there something that keeps you from resting? Something specific? The question sat in the room. He was very still. Yes, he said. Is it something you want to talk about? A pause that lasted long enough to feel like a wall going up. No, he said. All right. She let it be. He looked at her like he expected something else. A push, a press, a further question. When nothing came, the line of his shoulders did something subtle. Released, slightly. Some fraction of the tension in him dropped by maybe 5%, and given how much tension he was carrying, 5% was not nothing. You're going to ask me again, he said, at some point. Probably, she admitted, but not today. Another geography shift in his face. He stood then, moved back to his desk with that same unhurried certainty, and she understood the meeting was over. She gathered herself, metaphorically, she hadn't brought her notes today, and stood. There are sessions tomorrow and the day after, he said, not looking up from his desk. And translation will be needed for the VETH documents. Your contract covers the full summit? It does. Then you'll be present. He pulled a document toward him. And Nora. She stopped. The chair, he said, the one at the center of the table. Yes. It's mine. He still wasn't looking at her. No one sits in it. There's a reason it has no placard. Everyone simply knows. Everyone, he added, with just the faintest dry edge, except apparently, unbound mediators who arrive late. She felt heat in her face. I was told. I tried to read the... Keep it, he said. She stopped. The chair. He turned a page. For the duration of the summit. Keep it. She stood in the center of the study, processing this. Why? She asked. He didn't answer for a moment. She watched his pen move across the document, steady and deliberate, like he was considering whether to give her the real answer or a functional one. Because apparently, he said, very quietly, without looking up, I sit better next to it. She found Aldrich in the corridor exactly where he'd said he'd be. He read her face the way experienced people read weather. Well, he said. He's given me his chair, she said, for the summit. Aldrich stared at her. The center chair, she clarified. He continued staring. He said he sits better next to it. Aldrich looked at the closed door, then at her, then at the closed door again. He ran one hand over his close-cropped hair in the slow, careful motion of a man recalibrating something fundamental. In 4 years, he said finally, I have never once heard him explain a decision to someone who didn't outrank him. He didn't really explain it, she said. He just said it. He said it to you. Aldrich looked at her with an expression that was equal parts calculation and something that might have been, under the right light, relief. Nora Voss, unbound mediator. No pack, no rank, no political leverage. He shook his head slowly. What are you? She thought about her wolf. Warm, calm, smiling its strange new smile inside her chest. I don't know yet, she said honestly. And she walked back out into the cold morning air of Dawnmere Keep, her left shoulder still carrying, like a memory the body hadn't released, The weight of the most powerful wolf in the world sleeping like a child. Chapter 3. He doesn't have nightmares, he has something worse. The second session was worse than the first. Not because anything went wrong. Technically, everything went right. The Veth boundary dispute moved forward. 3 clauses were revised. Nora translated 4 passages from the old tongue without error, caught a deliberate mistranslation in a counter-document that would have cost the Northern Territories a 12-mile strip of river access, and flagged it so quietly that only Aldrich noticed she'd done it. Professionally, it was one of her cleaner days. It was worse because she was acutely, unbearably aware of him the entire time. He sat to her right again, not in the center chair, which was hers now, apparently, a fact that had caused a ripple of visible discomfort among the council members who'd noticed the missing placard replaced with her name in Aldrich's handwriting. He sat slightly angled toward her, the way he had before, and he was completely, utterly present. Alert. Nothing like the man who had dropped off her shoulder like a stone finding water. He asked 3 questions during the session, each one surgical, each one landing in the exact spot that made 2 people across the table shift uncomfortably, and one general reconsider a position he'd held for 6 months. He was, when awake, genuinely terrifying. She found this somewhat inconvenient, given that she was also the person he'd drooled on. She kept her eyes on her notes. She was very professional about it. At one point, reaching for the water glass to her left, her forearm crossed the invisible border between their 2 spaces. A matter of 3 inches, no more, and his eyes dropped to her arm for exactly 1 second before returning to the map in front of him. But she felt it. The way you felt a spotlight move across you even when you weren't looking at the source. The session ended at dusk. She was gathering her notes when Aldrich appeared at her elbow. "He'd like you to remain," he said quietly. She looked up. The hall was emptying. Cale was still at the table, speaking in low tones with one of the generals, his back half turned. "For what?" she asked. Aldrich glanced toward his alpha, then back at her. He didn't specify. With him, that usually means he will specify when he's ready, and not before. She put her notes back down. The general finished. Left. The hall emptied fully, and then it was just the 3 of them, her, Aldrich and Cale, standing at the far end of the long obsidian table, with his hands braced on the surface, looking at the map like it owed him something. "Leave it," he said, without looking up. It took her a moment to realize he was talking to Aldrich. Aldrich looked at her. She gave him a small nod. "I'm fine." And he left, pulling the heavy doors closed behind him with the soft, definitive sound of someone who took door closing seriously. Silence. She stayed in her seat. He stayed at the end of the table. The fire in the wall grates had burned down to embers while they'd worked, and the hall was cooling now, the particular deep cold of stone buildings after dark coming up through the floor. She waited. He straightened finally, turned, walked the length of the table toward her, and stopped 2 seats away, which felt deliberate. Close enough to speak without raising his voice, far enough to maintain something. She wasn't sure what. Architecture, maybe. The structure of a distance that let him say things he wouldn't say standing right next to her. "You caught the mistranslation," he said. "Yes. In the Veth counter-document, the river clause. The word they used for boundary in Old Tongue has 2 meanings," she said. "One refers to a fixed geographic line. The other refers to a line that shifts with seasonal water levels. They used the second and wrote the first in the common translation. It would have been nearly impossible to enforce, and entirely in their favor." He was watching her with that particular quality of attention she was starting to recognize, the kind that didn't feel like being watched so much as being read. How many people in this room would have caught it? She thought about it honestly. 2, maybe 3. "I would have caught it," he said, "eventually, not in session." She nodded. "Which means they would have gotten the signature first," he said. "Yes." He pulled out the chair 2 seats from her and sat, not across, not beside, but that careful intermediate position. His forearms rested on the table. He looked at her directly. "I want to tell you something," he said, "and I want you to hear it as information, not as confidence. I'm not asking you to carry this. I'm giving it to you as context for whatever this is." He gestured between them, and the gesture was slightly awkward, which was the first time she had seen him be slightly awkward, and it did something devastating to her composure that she immediately suppressed. "All right," she said carefully. He was quiet for a moment. The fire popped distantly. "What keeps me from resting," he said, "is not anxiety. It's not stress. It's not the work, though people assume it's the work." A pause. "There's a name for it, in the old records. The texts the council keeps in the lower archive, Kairava, it translates roughly as the hollow. It's a condition documented in maybe a dozen alpha wolves across recorded history, always in those who have carried sustained guilt over a decision that cost lives." She was very still. "Not guilt in the common sense," he continued, his voice careful and even, like he was reading from something internal that he'd rehearsed many times and had never said out loud. "Not the guilt that fades with time or resolves with apology, the kind that takes root in the wolf itself, in the animal layer of us." He touched the table with one finger, lightly. "The wolf carries it as threat, unresolved, sustained threat, and threat prevents sleep, prevents real sleep. The wolf stays alert because it believes, on some fundamental level, that if it rests, if it fully lets go, something will be lost that cannot be recovered." The room was very quiet. She chose her next words with the precision she gave to old-tongue translation. "What did you lose?" she asked. "Not what did you do. That would have been a wall. What did you lose?" He looked at her. "A village," he said. 3 years ago, 11 wolves." His voice didn't change. It had the flatness of something that had been said internally so many times it had worn itself smooth. "A border call I made incorrectly. I had intelligence that the southern faction was retreating. I ordered my soldiers to stand down to allow for a civilian crossing. The intelligence was wrong. The faction wasn't retreating. They came through the crossing point and..." He stopped. His jaw tightened. The 11 were civilians. 2 of them were children. Silence. "I was right, strategically, based on what I knew," he said. "Every advisor I had told me afterward that the same information would have led any alpha to the same decision, that it wasn't a failure of judgment, it was a failure of intelligence." A pause that had something raw in it. "I have never been able to make myself believe that." She didn't say "I'm sorry," he wasn't asking for that. She could feel the shape of what he needed, and it wasn't comfort, it was something quieter, to be heard without being managed. So she just said, "No, I don't imagine you could." He looked at her. "Most people," he said slowly, "when I tell them this, and I don't tell people this, I want to be clear, this is not a thing I tell people. They immediately tell me it wasn't my fault." "It probably wasn't," she said, "in the technical sense, and that's completely irrelevant to what your wolf is carrying." Something shifted in him, something significant. "Yes," he said quietly, "that's exactly it." She understood this, had understood versions of it in the wolves she'd mediated for, the ones who carried old decisions like stones in their chests. The rational mind could be convinced. The wolf didn't work that way. The wolf kept score in a language that logic couldn't speak. "The Kairava," she said, "the hollow. What do the old records say about resolution? Is there a way through it?" He leaned back slightly. "The records describe 2 paths. The first is time, sustained peace, no further losses, long enough for the wolf to recalibrate its threat assessment. That path takes years, sometimes decades." He paused. "The second is..." He stopped. "What?" she asked. He was looking at the table. "The records describe a concept they call a grounding presence, something external that the wolf recognizes as safe, genuinely safe. Not performing safety, not enforced calm, but something the wolf reads as real in a way it can't override. When a wolf with Kairava encounters a grounding presence, it can, temporarily, release the alert state. It can rest." He paused. "Properly rest." She heard this, held it. "Like on a shoulder," she said quietly. He didn't answer for a moment. "Like on a shoulder," he said. The fire was very low now. The cold had fully arrived in the room, that specific stone and night cold that pressed against windows. She became aware that they had been sitting in a hall alone together for nearly an hour, that it was fully dark outside, that this was, by any political or social standard of the werewolf world, extremely unusual. She became aware of this, and found that she didn't want to leave. She addressed that finding carefully, filed it away, and did not act on it. How often, she asked, do the old records say the grounding presence helps? It's not curative, he said. It doesn't resolve the Karava. It allows rest. It gives the wolf enough relief to function. His voice was very flat on that last word. Function. She heard everything in it. What it cost him. To be reduced to managing himself in increments. But it doesn't fix it, she said. No. He looked at her. The Kairava resolves only when the guilt does. When the wolf releases what it's holding. A pause. I have not found a way to do that. She wanted to say, maybe you haven't found the right help. She didn't. Too much, too fast, too presumptuous for a woman who had known him for 2 days, and had spent most of one of them sitting very still. She filed that one away too. What happened tonight, she said instead, when you stayed alert through the whole session? Does that cost you something? Physically? He looked mildly surprised that she'd framed it that way. Yes. The sustained alert state is taxing, in the way that running too long is taxing. Eventually the body starts making compromises. He looked at his hands, the ones that weren't entirely steady. Concentration, fine motor function, judgment eventually, which is the one I can least afford. She looked at his hands. He noticed her looking. He turned them over on the table, palm up, a gesture that seemed almost involuntary, like something in him was showing her the cost before his brain could decide whether to permit it. The scars across his knuckles were more visible this way, old ones, long-healed, and the faint, almost imperceptible tremor, there when she looked for it, gone if she looked away. She didn't look away. You should sleep, she said. I know. Not diplomatically sleep, actually sleep. I know, he said again, with the tone of a man who had been told water was wet approximately 9,000 times, and was not finding the information more actionable for the repetition. She made a decision. She made it quickly, before the part of her brain that was sensible could catch up. Then I'll stay, she said. He looked at her. I'm not suggesting anything. I just mean... She gestured, slightly imprecise, not entirely unlike how he'd gestured earlier between them. If what the old records describe is real, if a grounding presence is what allows the wolf to release alert, then I can just sit here, while you sleep. I have notes to review. I have 2 documents to cross-reference before tomorrow's session. She kept her voice completely professional, completely measured. It's practical. You need to function tomorrow, and you have better judgment than any other alpha in that room. And the Veth delegation is absolutely going to try something in the morning session, and you should be sharp for it. She finished. She put her hands flat on the table. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't entirely read. It had layers to it, something that might have been resistance, and underneath the resistance, something that looked almost painfully like want. Not want the way she would have understood it if she were less careful, want the way starving things looked at food through glass. You'd sit here, he said, while I slept. In this chair, she said, with my notes, entirely ignoring you. A pause. That sounds, he said, very carefully, like the most undignified arrangement in the history of alpha governance. Probably, she agreed. I am the most feared wolf in the known world. You are, she said. And you haven't slept properly in 3 years, and your hands aren't steady, and the Veth delegation is going to eat you alive tomorrow if you don't rest tonight. She looked at him steadily. So. Silence. The fire had burned down to almost nothing. The room was cold and dark and very still. I'm going to get my notes, she said, standing before he could answer. And I'm going to sit in this chair and work for as long as I need to. And you are going to do whatever you want with that information. She walked to the door, pulled it open. Nora. She stopped. Turned. He was still at the table, both hands flat on its surface, looking at her with that storm-gray gaze that she was beginning to understand was not cold, had never been cold, but was the expression of a person who had locked a door so long ago they'd almost forgotten what they'd put behind it. Thank you, he said. Just that. No qualifier, no deflection. She nodded once. Get some sleep, she said, and she went to get her notes. Chapter 4. He didn't just sleep, he collapsed into it like a man falling off a cliff he'd been standing on for 3 years. She came back with her notes. She told herself, walking back through the narrow corridor with her folder under her arm and her heartbeat doing something she was professionally ignoring, that this was fine. That this was practical. That she had sat in rooms with sleeping wolves before. Sick ones, injured ones, wolves in the aftermath of territorial battles who needed a mediator present when they woke so negotiations could resume without delay. She was good at presence. She was good at being in a room without disturbing it. This was the same. This was completely the same. She pushed open the door to the great hall. He had moved. Not far. From the table to the chair at the near end of the room, the one closest to what remained of the fire. It was a large chair, dark wood and old leather, the kind of chair that existed in rooms like this, to suggest authority during informal meetings. He'd turned it slightly toward the wall, and was sitting in it with his head back and his eyes closed, and his arms on the armrests. He looked, from this angle, like a man who had decided something. She didn't speak. She went to the table, found a spot at the near end with enough candlelight to work by, set her notes out in her standard order, primary documents left, cross-references center, blank paper right, uncapped her pen, and began. She did not look at him. She worked. The first document was the Veth River Clause in its revised form, which she read twice and annotated with 3 questions about water rights precedent she'd need to cross-check in the morning. The second was a boundary record from 1887 that the council had pulled from the lower archive, handwritten in Old Tongue, which required the kind of slow, careful reading she actually enjoyed, the way the old language was constructed, its grammar almost architectural, built in layers. She found a footnote that complicated the Veth case considerably, and wrote 3 lines in the margin about it. She was deep in the footnote when she heard his breathing change. It happened slowly. She tracked it without meaning to, the way his breathing, which had been the controlled, measured breath of a man sitting awake with his eyes closed, gradually deepened and spaced out, lost its deliberateness. The specific quality of consciousness in a body's stillness shifted, and then shifted again, and then was gone. He was asleep. She looked up from her document. He had slid down slightly in the chair, not collapsed, not ungainly, but settled. His head had dropped to one side. His hands on the armrests had gone loose. The tension she had, she now realized, never once seen fully leave his face since she'd met him. The particular tautness of a man permanently braced for the next thing, had gone. He looked younger. That was the thought she had, involuntary and immediate. He looks younger. The years that lived in his face when he was awake were still there in the structure, the strong jaw, the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, but the weight behind them had lifted, and he looked like what he actually was, a man in his early 30s, not the most feared alpha in the world, just a man who hadn't slept in a very long time and had finally, in a cold hall in the dark, let himself stop. She looked at him for 3 seconds. Then she looked back at her documents. She worked. An hour passed, maybe more. The candles burned down by a third. The fire gave up entirely, settling to dull orange embers that threw the room into a shifting amber dark. She'd moved on to the third document, a cross-reference she needed less than she'd thought. The 1887 record covered the precedent entirely, and had begun drafting her summary notes for the morning when she heard it. A sound. Low, not loud, the kind of sound that took a moment to identify because it didn't belong in the room. She looked up. He was still in the chair, still asleep, but his hands, which had been loose on the armrests, were now gripping. His jaw had tightened. His head had moved back against the chair, and the line of his body had gone rigid. Not the rigidity of waking, but something else. Something internal. The sound came again. It was not quite a word, not quite a name. Something that lived below language, in the animal register, rough and low and wrong, in the way that sounds made in sleep were wrong when they came from someone carrying something terrible. She put her pen down. She stood up. She didn't go to him immediately. She stood beside the table and watched, the way you watched a weather system move, trying to read whether it would pass or escalate. His hands gripped and released on the armrests. His breathing had gone uneven, too fast, the deep resting rhythm broken into something ragged. His head moved once, sharply to the side. Then his whole body flinched. Full body, like impact. Like something hitting him that she couldn't see. She was across the room before she'd decided to move. She didn't think about it, didn't calculate. Her body made the decision and her mind followed. She crouched beside the chair, put one hand, carefully, slowly, palm flat, against the back of his hand where it gripped the armrest. "Hey," she said, quietly, "you're all right." His hand stopped moving. She didn't know if he heard her. She didn't know if sleeping wolves heard anything, or if what she was doing was reaching him or simply existing near him. The way the old records described a grounding presence. Not doing anything, just being. "You're all right," she said again. The same quiet register. Not soothing exactly. She wasn't performing calm. She was just keeping her voice even and real. "You're in the hall. Nothing's happening. You're all right." His breathing didn't smooth out immediately, but it stopped accelerating. She stayed crouched beside the chair with her hand over his and watched the room and waited. It took 4 minutes, she counted, quietly, in the back of her mind. 4 minutes of his breathing working its way back down, from ragged toward slow, of his hands releasing their grip on the armrests, degree by degree, of his body unbracing itself from whatever had hit it in the dream. At minute 4 he exhaled, a long, full exhale, the kind that emptied the chest completely, and his head dropped back against the chair again, and the tension left his face. He was deeply asleep again within another minute. She stayed where she was for a moment longer, her hand still over his, her knees starting to protest the crouch. His hand under hers was warm and still, and she was acutely, helplessly aware of every point of contact, the ridge of his knuckles, the old scar tissue, the absolute stillness of a hand that had, a few minutes ago, been white-knuckled on an armrest. She straightened. She went back to the table. She sat down. She did not pick up her pen for a full 2 minutes. She stared at the document in front of her and did not see a single word of it. Her wolf was doing the thing again, the warm, calm home thing, and this time it was louder, less like a suggestion and more like a statement. She put her hand over her sternum as if she could press it down, that sound, that warmth. It didn't press down. She picked up her pen. She worked. He woke at the second hour. She heard it, the change in his breathing again, but in reverse this time, a deepening of consciousness returning, gradual and unalarming. His exhale shifted rhythm, a moment of stillness that was aware stillness rather than sleeping stillness. She didn't look up from her notes. "Don't say anything," she said. A pause. "I wasn't going to," he said. His voice was rough with sleep. It did something to the air of the room, that voice, rottened and low and stripped of all its careful control. "You had," she started, then reconsidered. "You were restless. Around the first hour. I came over, put my hand on yours. You settled." Silence. "I see," he said. "I'm telling you so you know," she said, still not looking up, "in case you felt it, and didn't know what it was. It was just my hand. Nothing." She searched for the word. "Nothing significant." "All right," he said. She heard him shift in the chair, heard him sit forward. A long pause in which she could feel him taking in the room, the burned-down candles, the dead fire, the darkness outside the windows. "How long?" he asked. "Roughly 2 hours." Another pause. Longer. "Nora." She looked up. He was leaning forward in the chair, elbows on his knees, hands loosely linked. He was looking at her across the space between them, with an expression that was completely unguarded, in a way she suspected he was not aware of, the particular open-facedness of someone who had just woken up and hadn't yet reassembled their armor. She looked at that face and felt something in her chest fold quietly in half. "You stayed," he said. "I said I would. People say things." "I know," she said. "I stayed anyway." He looked at her. The amber light from the dying embers was the only light left, and it made the room close and warm-seeming, despite the cold. She was aware of how still everything was. The keep had gone fully quiet around them, deep night quiet, the quiet of a building full of sleeping people. Just the two of them awake in it. There were 11 of them, he said. She didn't move. In the dream, he said. His voice was flat again, but differently flat than before. Not worn smooth flat, just careful. It's always the crossing. I'm always in the same position, same light, same information in my hand. I give the same order. And then I watch the same. He stopped. His jaw did the thing it did. I've given the order 1,000 times in the dream. I've tried changing it, tried giving a different command. It doesn't matter. In the dream, the outcome is always the same. Because the dream isn't where the decision lives, she said quietly. The dream is just the wolf's way of showing you what it's holding. Changing the dream doesn't change the holding. He looked at her. You know something about this. Not a question, she answered anyway. My mother, she said. She carried something like this. Not Kairava. She wasn't an alpha. The condition is specific to, she paused, but something similar. A decision she made when our family was crossing borders during the boundary wars. She chose to move us at a specific time, and there was a raid, and my younger brother. She stopped, recalibrated. He survived, but she spent 15 years dreaming the moment she chose to move. His eyes were on her, completely on her. What helped her? He asked. She thought about her mother, about the woman she'd been before those 15 years, and the woman she'd become after, and the small, quiet difference that had finally appeared in her face when the dreaming slowed. Someone who knew what she was carrying, Nora said, and didn't try to take it from her, didn't tell her to put it down or that it wasn't real, just knew and stayed. She paused. She said it was like being in water. Carrying the weight in water is still carrying it, but water holds you up at the same time. He was very quiet. And you think, he said, slowly, that's what you're... I don't think anything, she said, before he could finish framing it in a way that would make them both have to decide what to do with it. I'm a mediator. I sat here with my notes, and you slept better than you have in 3 years, and tomorrow the Veth delegation is going to try something with the water rights clause, and you need to be sharp. She looked back at her documents. That's all this is. A pause. Right, he said. Right, she confirmed. Silence. Then, quietly, with the dry edge she was starting to recognize as the closest he came to humor when his guard was fully down. You have ink on your left hand. She looked. She did. It's from the 1887 archive document, she said. The binding was loose. Did you find what you needed in it? Yes. There's a footnote about water rights precedent that significantly complicates the Veth case. Show me. She looked up. He had stood and was crossing the room toward her with that unhurried certainty, and she had approximately 3 seconds to become very busy rearranging her notes before he reached the table and stopped beside her chair, not across from her, beside her, and leaned down to look at the document she was pointing to. He was very close. The cedar and rain and lightning scent of him was in her breathing space, and her wolf made the soft, contented sound again that she was starting to genuinely resent. Here, she said, pointing to the footnote with her ink-stained finger. Her voice was perfectly steady. She was very proud of that. The 1887 ruling specifies that boundary lines along seasonal waterways revert to the previous 10-year median during dispute periods. If that applies to the current clause, then the Veth claim reduces by 40%, he said. His voice was quiet, close to her ear. She could feel the warmth of him. He'd been asleep and was still warm with it, and she stared at the footnote with the fixedness of a woman who had decided she was a professional and was going to continue being one. Yes, she said. He straightened. She breathed. You should have been a legal scholar, he said, moving back toward his chair. I was offered a position, she said, at the Eastern Archive, twice. He stopped, turned. You turned down the Eastern Archive. I like being in rooms when things happen, she said. The archive is where you go after things have already happened. He looked at her for a long moment with that expression she couldn't entirely catalogue, the layered one, with the resistance on the surface and something deeper below it that she had stopped trying to name. Get some sleep, he said. She blinked. I have notes too. You've been here for 3 hours, he said. You have a session in the morning. Get some sleep, Nora. The way he said her name was different in this room, in the dark, after everything that had just happened. She was cataloging it before she could stop herself. The weight of it, the way it sat differently in his mouth than other people's names sat in their mouths. There's a room, he said, before she could respond. Second door on the left in the corridor. It's not being used. Aldrich keeps it available for late sessions. He paused. Take it. She looked at him. That's... She started. Practical, he said. Flat, even. Looking at the wall beside her, rather than at her face. The north wing where you've been quartered is 20 minutes in the cold. This is 2 minutes. You have a session at dawn. It's practical. She opened her mouth. I know what you're going to say, he said. And you're right, it's not nothing. I'm not pretending it's nothing. His eyes came to hers then, direct and steady. I'm asking you to stay in the building, that's all. She held his gaze. Her wolf was no longer smiling. It was perfectly, completely, devastatingly still. The stillness of something that has found the thing it was looking for, and is afraid to breathe in case it disappears. Second door on the left, she said. Yes. She gathered her notes slowly, capped her pen, stacked everything with care. She picked up her folder. She walked to the door. Kale, she said. He looked up. You slept 2 full hours, she said. The dream came once. You came back from it. She met his eyes. That's not nothing either. She left before she could see his expression change. But she heard, very quietly, in the last second before the door closed behind her, an exhale, long and full and real, like a man setting something down, just for a moment, but still. Chapter 5. He sent for her before the session, before the sun was up, before he had a reason anyone else would believe. She didn't sleep well. This was, she told herself, entirely reasonable. She was in an unfamiliar room, in an unfamiliar bed, in the keep of the most powerful alpha in the known world, after an evening that had involved holding said alpha's hand through a nightmare, and then being told to stay in his building like it was a completely normal thing to ask of someone she'd known for 3 days. Sleeping badly was the only sensible response to all of that. What was less sensible was the reason she actually didn't sleep well, which had nothing to do with the room or the bed or the circumstances, and everything to do with the sound of that exhale, the one she'd heard through the door. Long and full and real. She lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling, and tried not to think about the way his face had looked in the amber firelight, unguarded in a way she suspected very few people had ever seen. She tried not to think about the specific quality of his voice saying her name in the dark. She tried not to think about her wolf, which was currently doing absolutely nothing, just sitting inside her chest like a cat in a sunbeam, radiating a warmth so profound and irritating that she wanted to have a stern conversation with it about professional boundaries. She tried not to think about any of it. She thought about all of it. Dawn arrived gray and cold through the narrow window. She was already dressed. After rest, the knock came before she reached the door. She opened it. One of Kale's household staff, young, serious-faced, wearing the plain dark uniform of Dawnmere Keep, stood in the corridor holding a folded note and a tray with tea and bread. From the Alpha, the young man said, extending the note. She took it. He set the tray on the small table inside the door and left without waiting. She unfolded the note. The handwriting was not what she expected. She'd have predicted something spare and controlled, the penmanship of a man who didn't waste motion. Instead, it was fast and slightly uneven, the writing of someone who thought faster than their hand could follow. The morning session starts at 7th bell. Before that, study, when you're ready. There's something in the Veth counter documents I want your read on before we go in. She read it twice. Read it a 3rd time. When you're ready. Not come immediately, not a summons. When she was ready. She put the note down, drank the tea, ate the bread, took precisely as long as she needed. Then she went. He was already at his desk when she arrived, the study lit by morning light now instead of firelight, which made it look different. Less sealed, less private, the bookshelves more visible, the organized chaos of the desk more apparent. 3 documents were spread in front of him, and a 4th was in his hand. He was reading with the focused stillness of a man who had slept, actually slept. and whose mind was running clean. He looked up when she came in. "You look better," she said, before she could decide not to. Something crossed his face. Not offense. More like surprise at the directness of it. "I slept another 4 hours," he said. "After I left?" "After you left." He set the document down. "The room you were in, I could..." He paused. The proximity helped, even with the wall between us. She absorbed this. "Your wolf could sense me through the wall." "Yes." She sat in the chair across from his desk, not the fire chairs, the desk chairs, which felt appropriately professional. I didn't know the grounding effect worked at a distance." "Neither did I." He looked at the documents. "The records I've read are incomplete. Most accounts of Kairava end badly. The wolf exhausts itself before it finds resolution. The grounding presence is mentioned but not examined in detail. There are maybe 4 accounts where it's documented as a sustained effect rather than a one-time occurrence." "And in those 4 accounts," she said carefully, "how does it work? How does the wolf recognize the grounding presence?" He was quiet for a moment. He picked up his pen and set it down again. He did this twice before he answered. "In 2 of the accounts," he said, "the grounding presence is described as a healer, someone with specific training in wolf soul work, who was brought in deliberately." A pause. "In the other 2, he stopped. She waited. "In the other 2, he said, it's a mate." The word sat in the room. She sat very still. "I'm not saying that's what this is," he said immediately, and the speed of it told her he'd been sitting with this information for hours, probably since he'd woken, probably since before he wrote the note. "I want to be clear about that. The bond doesn't work the way people describe it in stories. It's not instant. It's not unambiguous. It's a process of recognition that can take weeks," she said. "Sometimes months. I know. I've read about it." He looked at her. "You've read about the mate bond." "I've mediated 6 disputes involving contested mate bonds," she said. "I know the theory fairly well." A pause. "I just have never..." She stopped, recalibrated. "I'm unbound. I've spent my adult life in rooms full of paired wolves and functioning packs, and I've always assumed that it simply wasn't." She looked at the window. "That it wasn't something that was going to happen to me." "Why?" She considered this. It was a fair question, and it deserved a real answer. "Because the bond finds you through your pack," she said. "Through proximity, through shared space, through the overlapping of wolves who live in the same territory over time. I've never stayed anywhere long enough. I've never belonged anywhere that would..." She paused. "That would give it the conditions it needs." He was watching her with that careful, layered attention. "And yet," he said quietly. "And yet," she agreed. The word hung between them, and neither of them addressed what it was hanging from. He picked up the document that had been in his hand when she arrived. "The Veth counter-proposal," he said. His voice shifted, not abruptly, but deliberately, the way a hand on a rudder shifts course. She recognized it and followed his lead, because some conversations needed to be set down before they could be picked up properly, and this was one of them. "There's a clause I want you to look at, Section 4, the tributary rights subclause." She leaned forward. He turned the document toward her, and she read, and they worked. They worked for 40 minutes before the session. It was different from the mediation work she usually did, different from the cross-referencing and translation she'd been doing alone. He worked fast and thought in large shapes, seeing the political architecture of things before the details. She worked in the details and saw the places where the architecture had cracks. They found, fairly quickly, that they didn't overlap. They fit together. She caught herself thinking this around the 20-minute mark, and spent approximately 30 seconds being extremely irritated about it, before returning to the subclause. "Here," she said, pointing. "This language, natural tributary in the common translation. In Old Tongue, the original would have been konfeth, which means a waterway that is tributary by nature, but may be primary by season." He went still. "So during the dry season, when the main river is low, what they're calling a tributary becomes the functional primary channel, which means their claim extends the boundary by 3 miles during exactly the months when the northern packs need river access most." His voice had sharpened, not anger, precision. the particular aliveness of a mind running at full speed. They've been building this for 2 sessions. The mistranslation yesterday, now this. They're constructing a legal framework piece by piece. And waiting for someone to sign before anyone reads the pieces together. He looked at her, she looked at him. Something quick and electric passed between them. Not personal, not the warm animal thing her wolf kept doing, but the specific shared satisfaction of 2 minds that had just caught something neither would have caught alone. When the session starts, he said, I'm going to let them present the subclause. I want them to commit to it publicly before we respond. And then you're going to read the original Old Tongue version into the session record, he said. Formally, so it's documented. That will humiliate their delegation, she said. Yes, no apology in it. They've been trying to take 3 miles of river access from packs who depend on that water to feed their people. They'll survive humiliation. She nodded. All right. He stood. We should go. She gathered her notes, the real ones now, the ones annotated with everything she'd found across 3 days of working through the night. She was good at this. She knew she was good at this. But she had not, in 10 years of mediating, felt quite like this going into a session, this particular alignment of purpose, this sense of walking into a room with someone, rather than for them or around them. She didn't examine that feeling closely. They walked to the great hall. The session was, by any technical measure, a disaster for the Veth delegation. Not because anything dramatic happened. Cale didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He sat at his angle slightly toward the center chair, toward her, and he listened with the perfect patience of a man who already knew the end of the story. And when the Veth lead delegate presented the subclause with the careful confidence of someone playing a card they believed was unbeatable, Cale simply said, Before we continue, I'd like the Old Tongue original entered into the session record. Nora. She read it. She read it in Old Tongue first, as formally required, and then she translated it. Clearly, every word precise. The silence that followed was the specific silence of a room in which 30 people have simultaneously understood that something has gone wrong for someone and are calculating what that means for themselves. The Veth lead delegate's face did something complicated. Aldrich wrote something in the session record. Cale looked at the delegate for a long moment. Then he said, very quietly, Would you like to revise the subclause, or shall we proceed with the accurate translation? The delegate chose revision. It took the rest of the session. But by the end of it, the tributary rights had been correctly defined, the seasonal boundary language had been specified, and the 3 miles of river access that had been quietly constructed into the Veth claim over 2 days of legal architecture had been quietly, thoroughly removed. The Veth delegation left looking like people who had sat down to a card game and discovered mid-hand that their opponent had been reading their cards in the reflection of a window the whole time. Afterward, the hall cleared fast. She was organizing her notes. She always organized her notes immediately after a session, before the details blurred, when she became aware that he hadn't left. She looked up. He was standing at his end of the table, watching her. What? She asked. Nothing, he said. Then, I've been thinking about what you said this morning, about the bond not finding you because you've never stayed anywhere. She put her pen down. You don't have to, she started. I'm not finished, he said. Not sharply, just completing the sentence. I've been thinking about it, and I want to say something that I'm going to say poorly, because I don't. He paused. The slight awkwardness was back, and she found it just as devastating as the first time. I don't say things like this. She waited. The summit ends in 8 days, he said. After that, your contract with the council concludes and you'd return to... He stopped. Where do you go? Between assignments? There's a way station in the Middle Territories, she said. Other Unbound use it. It's not... She searched for the word. It's not a home. It's a place I put my bags. Something moved in his face. I'd like you to stay, he said. After the summit. Not for the council. Not for a new contract. He looked at her directly, with the unflinching quality he had when he wasn't pretending to be easy about something. I'd like you to stay, because you're the first person in 3 years who has known what I'm carrying, and not tried to take it from me, or tell me to put it down. A pause. And because my wolf sleeps when you're in the building. The room was very quiet. She looked at him, the exhaustion that was still there but lighter, the steadiness that had come back to his hands overnight, the gray storm eyes that were watching her with the specific openness of a person who has said an enormous thing and is not going to take it back. "You're asking me to stay," she said. "I'm asking you to stay." As what? The question sat between them. She watched him work through it, watched the layers of him, the alpha and the man, and the wolf who hadn't rested in 3 years, work through the question, and arrive at an answer that was honest, because he'd stopped, somewhere in the last 4 days, having the energy to be anything else. "I don't know yet," he said, "but not nothing." She looked at her notes, at the window, at the space between them that had been shrinking. She now realized, in small, precise increments, since the moment she'd sat in a chair that wasn't supposed to be hers. 8 more days, she said. 8 more days, he agreed. And then we'll know more than we know now. Yes. She picked up her pen. Then let's not waste them, she said, and went back to her notes. He stood at the end of the table for a moment longer. Then, very quietly, he laughed. It was small, barely a sound, more a quality of breath, shaped like amusement. But it was real, and it was warm, and it changed his face entirely. She didn't look up, but she was smiling at her notes for the rest of the afternoon. Chapter 6. It wasn't a dramatic moment. It was a Tuesday. Disasters rarely announce themselves. 6 days into the summit, Nora stopped pretending. Not about everything. She was still professional in the sessions, precise, measured, seated in her center chair with her notes in order and her translations exact. She still addressed him as Alpha Dawnmere in company, still kept the appropriate distance in public spaces, still gave no outward indication that she spent her evenings in his study, and her nights 2 doors down the corridor, and her early mornings working beside him at his desk before the rest of the keep had fully woken. What she stopped pretending was simpler than all of that. She stopped pretending, to herself, in the quiet of her own chest, that this was only practical. It had been practical. It had started as practical. But there was nothing practical about the way she listened for his footstep in the corridor before he knocked. Nothing practical about the way her wolf had stopped doing the warm and smiling thing, and had settled into something deeper and quieter and infinitely more alarming. The specific stillness of an animal that has stopped searching because it has found. Nothing practical about the way she'd started leaving a second cup beside the tea tray in the mornings, without being asked, because she'd noticed on day 3 that he always arrived at the study before his household staff brought his morning tea, and spent the first 20 minutes working on nothing but yesterday's momentum and cold air. He'd seen the second cup on day 4, hadn't said anything, drank it. She'd known, when he drank it without comment, that something had shifted between them that neither of them was going to name yet. She was still cataloging that shift, turning it over quietly in the back of her mind, the way you turned over a word in a foreign language, learning its edges, when day 6 arrived and everything went wrong. It started with a letter. Not unusual. Letters arrived at Dawnmere Keep constantly, carried by runners from a dozen different packs and territories. She'd grown accustomed to the rhythm of them, the way Aldrich sorted and prioritized, the way certain letters made it to Cale's desk within the hour, and others waited in a stack for the end of day. This one arrived during the morning session. She noticed it because Aldrich, who received it from a runner at the side door, read it in the corridor, and then came to stand at the edge of the hall with the specific stillness of a man who was deciding how to manage something. He caught her eye, not Cale's, hers, and gave her a look she couldn't entirely read but that had the quality of a warning. She looked back at her notes. The session continued. Cale was mid-discussion with the Northern General about the revised boundary language when she felt it. A shift in him, subtle and sudden, like a change in air pressure. She looked up. His eyes had moved to Aldrich, who had moved a half step into the room, and something passed between them that was too small to be a signal, but too deliberate to be nothing. Adjourn, Cale said. Not loudly, but the room stopped. We'll resume at second bell, he said, to the council. There's a matter requiring my attention. The council filed out with the practiced efficiency of people who had learned not to ask questions. Nora began gathering her notes. She was reaching for the 1887 archive document, when Aldrich appeared at her elbow. "He'll want you to stay," Aldrich said quietly. She looked up. "Why?" Aldrich glanced toward the door the council had exited through, then back at her. He folded the letter he was holding in half and held it for a moment, deciding. "The Veth delegation," he said, "filed a formal complaint with the Interpack Council this morning, overnight." She stilled. "They're claiming," Aldrich said, his voice carefully level, "that the session record was falsified. That the old tongue translation entered on day 4 was deliberately altered to undermine their legal position." He paused. "They're calling it misconduct." She put her pen down. "They're naming you specifically," he said. The room was very quiet. The last of the council members had gone. Cale was standing at the far end of the table, the letter in his hand now. Aldrich must have passed it to him, reading with the focused stillness of a man running calculations at very high speed. "The translation was accurate," she said. Her voice came out even. She was glad about that. "I know," Aldrich said. "I was there. I have the original document and the session record, and 40 witnesses." He paused. "That's not the point." "Then what is the point?" "The point," said Cale, from the end of the table, not looking up from the letter, "is that the Interpack Council has the authority to suspend a mediator's registration while a misconduct complaint is under review." He looked up then. His eyes were very dark. "Which means that, as of this morning, pending the review, which takes between 3 and 6 weeks, you can't work." She absorbed this. "They can't suspend my registration based on a complaint with no—" "They can begin preliminary suspension pending investigation," Cale said. "The Interpack statutes allow it. It's designed to protect the integrity of active negotiations." He set the letter down. "The Veth delegation knows the statutes. They filed this at the exact moment in the summit calendar when a mediator suspension would cause the most disruption." She looked at the letter on the table. "They're not really going after my registration," she said slowly. "No," he said. "They're going after the session record. If they can discredit the translator, they can argue the entire 4th session should be voided." A pause, including the tributary rights correction. 3 miles of river access, 3 miles of water that northern pack families needed to survive the dry months. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Now," he said, "I contact the Interpack Council and request an expedited review. I submit the original documents, the archive record, and the testimony of every witness in that session." He was moving as he spoke, back to his desk, pulling open the correspondence drawer. "And I find out which member of the IPC the Veth delegation has in their pocket, because this complaint moved too fast to have been filed without inside coordination." She watched him work. "And me?" she asked. He looked up. Something in his expression, not the alpha assessment look, the other one, the one she'd first seen in the amber firelight, held for a moment. "You stay," he said. "You're under my roof and my word. No one touches your registration while you're here." "That's not," she started. "You can't just—" "I can," he said, flat, final. "My authority predates the Interpack statutes by 2 centuries. A mediator in active residence at a summit under my governance is protected under the old accords. They know that. They're betting you'll leave voluntarily rather than cause a political incident." She thought about the way station in the Middle Territories, about bags without a home to hold them. "I'm not leaving," she said. Something in him, small, fast, almost invisible, settled. "Good," he said. The afternoon was a controlled storm. She watched Cale work the way she'd watched very few people work in her life, with the combination of speed and precision that came from a mind that was, when rested, genuinely extraordinary. He drafted 3 letters in the time it took her to cross-reference the original documents. He sent for 2 of his own legal scholars from the Keep's archive. He had a conversation with his head of intelligence, Fen, who was a slight, quiet woman with sharp eyes and the energy of someone who was always 3 steps ahead of the conversation, that lasted 6 minutes and resulted in Fen leaving with a list and the expression of someone who had just been given an interesting problem. He moved through all of it without raising his voice once. She worked alongside him, pulling documents, flagging references, drafting the formal archive certification that would accompany the original Old Tongue text to the IPC. They'd been doing this for 6 days, and the rhythm of it was so established by now that they barely needed to speak. She would anticipate the next document he needed by tracking the sequence of his thought, and he would redirect or confirm with a gesture or a word. It was, she thought, the most efficient she had ever been in her working life. It was also, she thought, the most frightened she'd been in a long time. Not of the complaint. The complaint was manageable. Cale was right about the old accords, and the session record was clean. She wasn't frightened of losing the case. She was frightened of what came after it. Because after it, the summit would end, and the reason to stay would need to be something other than work. She was sitting with this fear, quietly, working through the archive certification language, when he sat down across from her at the study desk, not at his own chair but in the opposite one, her side of the desk, and put a cup of tea in front of her. She looked at it, looked at him. "You've been here 4 hours without stopping," he said. "So have you. I've had 3 cups of tea. I've been busy." Nora, his voice was quiet, specific, the voice that only happened in this room, in private. "Stop for a moment." She put her pen down. She looked at him across the desk and found him already looking at her with that expression, the layered one, the open one, the one that had been appearing with increasing frequency over the last 6 days, and increasing difficulty to catalog. "Are you all right?" he asked. Such a simple question. She'd been asked it 1,000 times in her professional life, and answered it 1,000 times with the functional version of yes. "I'm angry," she said, which surprised her as she said it. "I'm angry on behalf of those 3 miles of river, and she stopped. "I'm trying not to think about the end of the summit." He was very still. "Why?" he said. She looked at him. "Because after it I go back to a way station that isn't a home, and you go back to not sleeping properly, and the VETH delegation gets to walk away from this, having cost you 8 days of a summit, and me 6 weeks of my registration, and nothing actually." She stopped herself. She picked up her pen and put it down again. "It feels incomplete," she said, more carefully. "Professionally." "Professionally," he said. "Flat, not a challenge." "Among other ways," she admitted. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk. His hands, steady today, fully steady, the steadiest she'd seen them, linked loosely in front of him. "Can I tell you something?" he said. "You're going to tell me something regardless of what I say." "Yes," he agreed. "I'm going to tell you something." He looked at his hands for a moment. 3 years ago, after the crossing, after the 11, I made a decision, not consciously, not in words, but in the way that wolves make decisions, at the level where language doesn't reach. He paused. I decided I wasn't going to want anything for myself anymore. Not as punishment, not as penance. Just, he shook his head slightly. It felt obscene to want things, to have preferences, when people had died because I had made a choice based on what I believed was right. She didn't move. "So I stopped," he said, "wanting things. I worked. I governed. I solved problems and managed territories and sat in sessions and did everything that needed to be done, and I didn't want anything that was only for me." He looked up. "Until a nobody unbound mediator sat in my chair because she was late and didn't know the rules, and then stayed still for 40 minutes with my weight on her shoulder. And my wolf..." He stopped, exhaled. "My wolf wanted her to stay." The room was very quiet. "And every day since then," he said, "I've been trying to figure out if I'm allowed to want that." She was silent for a long moment. "Cale," she said. He looked at her. "You are allowed," she said, "to want things." Carefully, precisely, the way she'd say the most important line of a translation. Whatever happened 3 years ago, whatever the Kairava is holding, it doesn't cost you the right to want things. Those aren't the same debt. His jaw tightened, not with resistance, with the specific expression of someone receiving something they don't know how to hold yet. "I know that," he said, "in the part of me that thinks in words. And in the part that doesn't?" A pause. "Working on it," he said quietly. She nodded. She picked up her pen. Then she put it down again. "For what it's worth," she said, not looking at him, looking at the certification document in front of her. My wolf stopped looking for something 6 days ago. She kept her voice even. I've spent a long time being unbound, not belonging anywhere. My wolf was quiet about it, resigned, maybe. And then 6 days ago it just, she paused, stopped looking. Silence. What did it find? He asked, very quietly. She looked up. She held his gaze for a long moment, long enough to say the thing without saying it, long enough for him to read it the way wolves read things, below language. I'll let you know, she said, when I have the words for it. He looked at her for another moment. Then he reached across the desk and, with the deliberateness of someone choosing rather than reaching, turned the certification document to face him. The second paragraph, he said, voice returning to its working register. The statutory reference is wrong. It should cite Accord 14, not Accord 11. I know, she said. I was about to fix it. I know you were, he said. They worked until dark. And when the candles burned low and the keep went quiet around them, and she stood to leave, he walked to the study door with her, not something he'd done before, she noticed, always letting her find her own way to the corridor, and held it open. The IPC will clear you, he said. Within the week, I'll make sure of it. I know, she said. And the summit has 2 days left. I know that too. He looked at her in the doorway. The corridor behind her was dim and cold. The study behind him was warm. I'm going to ask you something in 2 days, he said. I want you to know it's coming, so you have time to think about it, whatever your answer is. Her heart did something that her wolf found deeply satisfying, and her brain found deeply inconvenient. All right, she said. All right, he said. She stepped into the corridor. She was 3 steps away when she stopped, turned back. He was still in the doorway. Sleep, she said. Yes, he said. Actually sleep, not work until 4th bell, and then… Nora. What? The corner of his mouth moved, just barely. Good night. She turned before he could see her smile. She was almost certain he heard it anyway. Chapter 7. She heard him before she saw him. That was new. Her wolf had started tracking him through walls. The 7th day should have been quiet. The summit was in its final administrative phase, the signing and countersigning of revised clauses, the formal recording of agreements, the procedural work that required witnesses and notaries but not much else. The kind of session Nora usually found satisfying in a low-key way. The way finishing a long translation was satisfying. Not exciting, but complete. The architecture of an agreement becoming real on paper. It should have been the easiest day. Instead, she woke at dawn with her wolf pacing. Not the warm, settled, found what it was looking for stillness of the last several days. Pacing. The restless, circling energy of an animal that had sensed something change in the night, and hadn't identified what yet. She lay still in the gray morning, and let it pace, and tried to read it. This was something her mother had taught her, long before the boundary wars, before the 15 years of dreaming. Don't fight your wolf, her mother had said. It knows things before you do. Your job is to learn its language, not silence it. She lay still and listened. What she got was, something is wrong with him. She was dressed and in the corridor in 4 minutes. She heard him before she reached the study. Not loudly. She wouldn't have caught it if she hadn't been listening for it. A sound through the heavy door, low and irregular. Not the nightmare sound from the first night. Not the rough half-word of a wolf fighting sleep. Something quieter, and in some ways worse. He was awake. She could tell the difference now, she realized, between his awake sounds and his asleep sounds, between the quality of silence around him when he was working, and the quality of silence around him when he was in the grip of something. She had learned his particular acoustics the way you learned the acoustics of a house you'd lived in long enough. The sounds that meant nothing, and the sounds that meant something. This sound meant something. She pushed the door open without knocking. He was at the window, not the desk, the window, standing with his back to the room and his hands braced on the frame the way she'd seen him on the first morning, except that morning he'd been composed and this morning he was not. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, the angles of him. The tension that had been gradually releasing over 7 days had returned, and it was worse for the contrast. Worse because she knew now what he looked like without it, and this was its opposite. "Kale," she said. He didn't turn. "You shouldn't be up yet." My wolf woke me. A pause. Something shifted in his shoulders. The faintest acknowledgement. "I didn't mean to." "You didn't do anything," she said. "It just knew." She came into the room, let the door fall closed behind her. "What happened?" He was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer. She went to the fire. Dead again. She'd noticed he never remembered to bank it properly before sleeping, and started rebuilding it. Kindling first, then the larger pieces, the methodical work of her hands giving him time. "I dreamed differently tonight," he said. She kept her hands on the fire. Different how? There were more of them. His voice was very controlled, the kind of control that was the surface of something else entirely. "In the dream, at the crossing. It's always 11. It has been for 3 years. The same 11, the same light, the same order, the same outcome. Tonight there were more." A pause. "There were people I didn't recognize. People who weren't there. Children who—" He stopped. It escalated. The dream escalated. She placed the last piece of wood and sat back on her heels. "That sometimes happens," she said carefully, "when the wolf senses that resolution is close. When something in the holding loosens slightly, the pressure redistributes. It can make the dreams more intense before it makes them less." "You know this how?" "My mother," she said. "Her dreams got worse the month before they stopped. Her healer called it the last storm." She looked at the fire catching. She said it felt like the guilt was trying to convince the wolf to keep holding it. One final argument for why it shouldn't let go. Silence. "And did she let go?" he asked. "Eventually," Nora said. "It took her longer than it should have, because she tried to do it alone." She stood, turned. He had turned from the window now, was facing the room, and in the early gray light she could see what the night had cost him. The steadiness she'd watched come back over the last week was fractured. His hands were braced at his sides rather than loose. His eyes had the specific exhausted darkness of someone who had slept and woken up more tired than they'd started. "Come sit down," she said. You're standing at a window at dawn after a bad night, and you have a full session today, and the summit closes tomorrow," she said. "Come sit down." He crossed the room and sat in the fire chair. She sat in the other one. The fire was catching now, beginning to push warmth into the immediate air between them. She looked at him. "Tell me about them," she said. "The 11. He looked at her sharply. "You've told me about the event," she said. "The decision. The intelligence failure, the outcome. You haven't told me about them." She held his gaze. "Who were they?" He was silent for a long moment. The fire crackled. "I looked them up," he said finally. "Afterward. I didn't have to. There was no protocol requiring it. No one expected it. But I needed to know." He paused. There was a woman named Sael, who had been crossing to reach her sister's pack. She'd been delayed 3 weeks because of the border closures, and she'd finally gotten clearance, and she was crossing that morning. Another pause. There were 2 brothers, 8 and 11 years old, who were crossing with their grandmother to join their parents who had already relocated. Their father was one of my own soldiers. He'd asked me, 2 months earlier, about the safety of civilian crossings in that corridor. His voice stayed level. She watched what it cost him. I told him it was safe. She didn't say anything. There was a healer from the Marin pack. A young one, 22. She'd been placed at the eastern outpost 3 months earlier specifically because we anticipated civilian movement through that corridor. She wasn't even crossing. She was stationed there to help anyone who needed medical attention during the passage. He stopped. She died doing exactly what I had put her there to do. The fire. "I know their names," he said. "All 11. I know what they were doing at that crossing, and why. I know who was waiting for them on the other side." A pause. "I know the soldiers' sons. The brothers who were crossing to reach their father. I send their family a provision allocation every month, anonymously. They don't know it comes from me." He looked at his hands. "I don't know what I think that accomplishes. It doesn't accomplish anything. But I can't stop." She sat with all of this for a moment. Sat with the weight of it. The names, the healer, the soldiers' sons. The monthly provisions sent anonymously into the void. "You've been carrying their names," she said softly. For 3 years. Not just the guilt. Their actual names and their actual lives. Yes. And no one knows that. No. She looked at him, this man who was feared across the entire werewolf world, who had made 7 alphas kneel, who had dissolved packs with letters, sitting in a fire chair at dawn carrying 11 names in his chest, like stones he couldn't put down, and wouldn't let anyone else know he was holding. "Can I tell you something?" she said. He looked up. "My brother," she said. "The one I almost told you about, on the 4th night. The one my mother was crossing the border to protect during the boundary wars." She paused. "He died anyway. Not at the crossing. Later. 2 years after. A different incident, nothing to do with my mother's decision, just the wars. He was 20. Cale was very still. "My mother carried the guilt of that crossing for 15 years, she said, believing that every choice she had made was the reason for every hard thing that came after. That if she had chosen differently that day, moved us earlier, or later, or not at all, somehow the chain of events that led to losing him would have been different." She looked at the fire. She spent 15 years trying to find the exact moment where she could have changed the outcome, and there wasn't one. There never is. The world is not that. She searched for the word. Not that precise. It doesn't hinge on single moments the way guilt insists it does. He was watching her. She finally understood that, Nora said, when she stopped trying to find the moment and started grieving the people. Not the decision, the people. She paused. "That's what the healer called it," she said. "Guilt is what happens when grief gets stuck in the machinery of what if. When you can't move forward to the grief itself because you keep reversing to the decision." Her voice was quiet. "Your wolf isn't holding guilt, Cale. Not really. It's holding grief that hasn't found its way out yet." The room was very still. He said nothing for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, not the flat, careful, controlled voice. Something rougher, something from a layer below the control. "Sael was 34, he said. "The healer's name was Orin. The soldiers' sons are named Bren and Win. Bren is 11 now, Win is 14. He paused. "I know their names." "I know," she said. "I don't know how to—" He stopped. His jaw worked. "I don't know how to grieve them when I'm the reason." "You're not the reason," she said. "You're one decision in a chain of 1,000 decisions made by a dozen people with incomplete information in the middle of a war. The faction that came through that crossing is the reason. The intelligence failure is the reason. The war itself is the reason." She held his gaze. "You are a man who did his best with what he had, and you have been punishing yourself for 3 years for being human in a situation that would have broken most people entirely." His eyes, those gray storm eyes that she had been reading for 7 days, were very bright. Not tears, or not only tears, something more complicated than that. The specific brightness of something that has been pressed in the dark for a very long time and is encountering light for the first time and doesn't know yet whether to move toward it or away. "I don't know how to let it go," he said, very quietly. "I know," she said. "Your wolf doesn't either. Not yet." She leaned forward slightly. "But it slept, Cale. For the first time in 3 years it actually rested. That means it's learning that it's safe to." She held his gaze. "You don't have to let go all at once. You just have to let it know that the letting go won't cost you everything." A silence so complete she could hear the fire. Then he did something she didn't expect. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, face in his hands, not dramatically, not collapsing, just putting it down for a moment. The weight of it, setting it somewhere external for 30 seconds. The way you set down something heavy, not to release it, but to give your arms a moment's rest before picking it up again. She didn't touch him. She didn't speak. She sat in the fire chair beside him, and she was present, and she was real, and she let her wolf do the thing it had been doing since the first day. That warm, quiet, grounding thing that she had stopped trying to explain or contain. After 30 seconds, he straightened. He looked at the fire. "My hands are steady today," he said. His voice was rough but even. She glanced at them. They were, yes. They've been steady for 5 days. "I know." He turned his head and looked at her directly. "That's you. That's you." she corrected quietly. Getting rest. Getting rest is you. I'm just... Don't, he said, not harshly, just stopping her from minimizing it. Don't do that. You know what you are. She held his gaze. I'm starting to, she said honestly. The morning light had strengthened while they'd been sitting, gray shifting toward pale gold, the keep beginning to sound around them, the distant movement of a building waking up. She became aware that they had been sitting in this room together for the better part of an hour, and that the session started at 7th bell, and that she should, practically speaking, go to her room and prepare. She stood. He stood with her. Again, that thing he'd started doing, accompanying her to the door, as if the simple act of walking her 3 feet was a thing he wanted to do, and had stopped finding ways not to. At the door she turned. You said you were going to ask me something, she said. Tomorrow? Yes. You don't have to wait until tomorrow, she said, if you're ready. He looked at her for a long moment. I'm not quite ready, he said. Not because I don't know what I want to ask, because I want to have... He paused. I want the words to be right. I've spent 3 years not wanting things for myself. I want to ask this correctly. Something in her chest folded quietly, carefully, completely in half. All right, she said. Tomorrow. She stepped into the corridor. Nora. She turned. He was in the doorway, morning light behind him, and he looked, tired still, and cracked open still, but somehow less crushed by it than he had at the window an hour ago, like something had shifted, fractionally, in the weight of what he was carrying. Oren, he said, the healer. She had been accepted to a teaching position at the Eastern Medical Academy. She was going to start in the spring. He paused. I want you to know, I say her name, not just here. He touched his chest briefly, but out loud. When I'm alone, I say all of them. She understood what he was giving her. What he was showing her. The first small motion toward grieving instead of guilty machinery. The names said out loud instead of locked in. That's good, she said softly. That's the beginning of it. He nodded once. She walked back to her room. She sat on the edge of the bed and put her face in her hands, and stayed there for 60 full seconds, not thinking, just feeling the enormous, terrifying, extraordinary weight of what was happening to her. Then she stood up, splashed cold water on her face, gathered her notes, and went to do her job. She was very good at her job. She was considerably less practiced at this other thing, this enormous, unnamed, wolf-level thing that had found her in a chair that wasn't supposed to be hers and had been growing ever since with the quiet certainty of something that had always been going to happen and had simply been waiting for the right conditions. Tomorrow, she thought. Tomorrow he would ask his question, and she already knew her answer. She was just waiting, like him, to find the right words for it. Chapter 8. He asked her at dawn, not in the study, not at the table, in the courtyard, in the cold, like the walls of the keep were too small to hold what he was trying to say. The last session of the summit lasted 4 hours. 4 hours of signatures and countersignatures, of formal readings and witnessed recordings, of the careful procedural work that turned 7 days of argument into something binding and real. Nora sat in her center chair. Her center chair, the one with her name in Aldrich's handwriting, the one she had accidentally claimed and been deliberately given. And she translated the final Old Tongue certifications and witnessed 3 documents and signed her name in 4 places as the summit's independent mediator. Her registration, as Cale had promised, had been cleared by the IPC 2 days prior. Expedited review, original documents submitted, the Veth complaint dismissed with a formal notation of insufficient evidence. The Veth delegation had sat through the final session, in the specific silence of people who had tried something, and failed, and were now calculating what it had cost them. She didn't look at them. She did her job. At the 3rd hour, the Northern General formally signed the revised boundary agreement, the one that included the correctly defined tributary rights, the seasonal boundary language, the 3 miles of river access restored to the packs who needed it. It was not a dramatic moment. He picked up a pen and he signed his name, and a clerk stamped it, and that was that. 3 miles of water for families who would never know there had been a week of architectural legal maneuvering designed to take it from them. She wrote signed, witnessed, recorded in her notes. She felt, quietly, that this was why she did this work. Cale signed last. He moved through the signing with the efficiency of a man who had done this many times, unhurried and exact. And she watched his hands, steady, completely steady, the steadiness that had been returning in increments for 8 days, move across the documents without pause. When he finished, he capped his pen and set it down and looked up. His eyes found hers immediately. Not a long look, not obvious to anyone else in the room, but direct and specific and carrying something in it that made her look back down at her notes before she did something unprofessional with her face. Today, she thought. He's going to ask today. The hall cleared in stages. Council members first, then the generals, then the delegations, then the staff. Aldrich managed the departure of the Veth delegation personally, which she suspected was deliberate, keeping them moving, keeping them from lingering in corridors where conversations could be had that shouldn't be had. She packed her notes with the particular care she gave to the last day of a summit. Final organization, everything in order, the physical act of closing something properly. She had 7 days of notes. They would go into the formal record, and then into the archive, and someone in 50 years might pull them for a boundary dispute, and read her handwriting in the margins, and have no idea what the room had been like, or what had happened in it. She found this thought, unexpectedly, a little sad. Nora. She looked up. Aldrich stood at the edge of the hall. Everyone else had gone. The room was empty except for the two of them, and, at the far end, Cale, still at his place, still standing, watching her with his hands loose at his sides. He'd like a moment, Aldrich said. He said it with the careful neutrality of a man who had been watching something develop for 8 days and had made his peace with it. When you're ready. She looked at Aldrich. He looked back. 4 years, she said quietly. You've served him 4 years. Yes. Have you ever seen him ask anyone to stay? Aldrich considered this with the seriousness it deserved. No, he said. But I've seen him close himself off from everything and everyone for 3 years, and I've watched that change in 8 days, and... He paused. I've stopped needing to understand it. He looked at Cale, then back at her. He's better. Whatever you are to him, he's better. She held this. Thank you, she said. Aldrich nodded once. He left. The doors closed. She walked the length of the hall toward him. It was a long hall. She had walked it every morning for 8 days, and it had always felt the same. Cold, deliberate, built for intimidation. Today it felt different. Or she felt different walking it. The same cold floor, the same too-high ceiling, the same obsidian table running the length of it like a dark river. She stopped when she reached him. He looked at her. She looked at him. Come outside, he said. The courtyard of Dawnmere Keep was not built for sentiment. It was stone and function, a working courtyard, stables to the north, the garrison entrance to the east, a well at the center that she had walked past every day without particularly noticing it. In the thin winter morning light it was gray and cold and very quiet, the summit traffic that had filled it for a week already dispersing, carriages pulling out through the main gate, the last of the delegations taking their leave. He walked her to the far side of the well, away from the gate, where a stone bench sat against the keep wall with the particular positioning of something that had been there long enough to grow into the space. She had not noticed this bench before. She suspected she had not been in this corner of the courtyard before. They stood rather than sat. He looked at the keep wall for a moment, then at her. I've been trying to find the right words since the 4th day, he said, when I told you I wanted you to stay. I remember. I have now had 4 more days, and I've concluded that there aren't right words. Exactly. There are honest words, and I can give you those. He looked at her steadily. I want to give you those. All right, she said. He was quiet for a moment. In the courtyard around them, the distant sounds of departure, hooves on stone, voices, the creak of carriage wheels, continued their muted withdrawal, and she had the sense that they were standing in a small, still pocket of the world, while the rest of it moved past. I'm going to tell you what I want, he said. Not what I can offer, or what makes sense, or what the political implications are. What I want, because you told me I was allowed, and I'm choosing to believe you. She waited. I want you here, he said. Not in the building, not 2 doors down the corridor or in the north wing. Here. In this keep, in this territory, with... He paused. The slight awkwardness was back, the one she'd found devastating the first time, and had found no less devastating in the 12 subsequent occasions she'd observed it. With me. Not as a mediator, not on contract, not as... I want you to understand I'm not asking you to give up your work. I know the work is part of what you are. I'm asking... He stopped, started again. I'm asking if you would consider making this your home, this place. If the way station in the Middle Territories is a place you put your bags, I want to be the place you come back to. The courtyard was very quiet. She looked at him, this man who had terrified the werewolf world for a decade and couldn't bank a fire properly, and said the names of 11 people out loud when he was alone, and had drunk a second cup of tea every morning for 5 days, without once commenting on the fact that she'd left it there for him. That's not the whole question, she said, quietly, not accusingly. He looked at her. You said 4 days ago that the records describe a grounding presence, as either a healer or a mate, she said. And you said the bond was a process of recognition. And you told me you wanted to ask me something in words that were right. She held his gaze. That's not all of it. He exhaled, a slow, full exhale, the kind she'd heard through a door on the 4th night and hadn't forgotten. No, he said, that's not all of it. Then say the rest. He looked at her with those storm-gray eyes that she had learned, over 8 days, were not cold, had never been cold, but were the expression of a person who felt things so completely that they had built walls around it, not to suppress the feeling, but to protect the people near it from the force of it. The walls were down now. My wolf knows you, he said, very quietly. Not knows you the way it knows the people in my keep, the people I've worked with, the people I've governed alongside. It knows you the way... He paused. The way a wolf knows one person in the world. Do you understand what I'm saying? She did. She understood exactly what he was saying. You're saying it recognized me, she said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. Your wolf recognized mine. The first day, he said, in the hall, I sat down next to you and my wolf. He shook his head slightly. I've never felt anything like it. I thought I was losing my mind. I thought the sleep deprivation had finally... He stopped. And then I fell asleep on your shoulder in the middle of a high council session, in front of 31 witnesses, which I think we can all agree was not my most dignified moment. She laughed. It came out before she could manage it, a real laugh, short and warm, and it surprised both of them. She saw it land on his face like something unexpected and welcome. It was not, she agreed. No, he said, and the corner of his mouth moved in that almost not quite a smile way that she had catalogued and treasured. But I think... The almost smile faded into something more serious. I think my wolf knew exactly what it was doing. Even then, I think it found you, and it simply... He paused. Let go. The words settled between them. Let go. She thought about what Aldrich had said on the first morning. He has not slept in 6 days. You may have just saved his life. She thought about the note. Do not wake him. She thought about her wolf, smiling, then settled, then still, then home. I need to tell you something, she said. He waited. I've been unbound for 10 years, she said. By choice. Not because I couldn't find a pack. I had offers, good ones, from people I respected. I turned them down because... She looked at the well in the center of the courtyard, the gray stone of it, the cold water dark at the bottom. Because belonging somewhere felt like a risk I didn't know how to take. After my brother. After watching my mother carry those 15 years. She paused. Belonging somewhere means it can be taken from you. Yes, he said, simply, not arguing with it. So I stayed unbound, she said. I stayed moving. I got very good at being present, without being present, at being in rooms without being in them. She looked back at him. And then, I sat in a chair that wasn't mine, and a man I'd never met fell asleep on my shoulder, and my wolf. She stopped. My wolf had never, in 10 years, reacted to another wolf the way it reacted to yours. It went calm, not suppressed. Genuinely, actively calm. Like something that had been holding tension for a decade finally. Let go, he said quietly. Let go, she confirmed, The word between them again, different this time, shared. I'm frightened, she said, of staying, of wanting this, of what it costs to belong somewhere, and then, she didn't finish it. I know, he said. I'm frightened too. He said it simply, without performance. The most feared alpha in the known world, standing in a cold courtyard, telling her he was frightened. I spent 3 years not wanting anything for myself, because wanting felt obscene when I was carrying. He paused. What I was carrying. And now I want something so completely that it... He looked at her. It scares me too. That's not me trying to make you feel better. That's just true. She looked at him for a long moment. The caravan, she said. It's not gone. No, he said. It's not gone. I'm not going to tell you it is. The guilt is lighter, somehow, after last night, after saying their names, after what you said about grief and machinery. He shook his head slightly. But it's not resolved. It could take time. It could take... He paused. I don't know how long. I know, she said. And the dreams. I know, she said again. I'm telling you this because I don't want to ask you to stay without being honest about what you'd be staying into, he said. It's not... He looked for words. It's not going to be easy, not immediately. I'm going to need the slight awkwardness again, deeper this time. I'm going to need the thing you've been giving me, the presence, the... I know what you need, she said softly. He met her eyes. And I need you to know, he said, that I know what you need too. You need a home that doesn't feel like a risk. You need someone who isn't going to... He stopped. Who isn't going to let you be unbound when you don't want to be anymore. He paused. I'm not going anywhere, Nora. Whatever this is. However long it takes, I'm not. He said it with a quietness that was more absolute than any declaration she'd ever heard. I'm not going anywhere. She stood in the cold courtyard of Donmere Keep and looked at the most feared alpha in the known world, telling her he wasn't going anywhere. Her wolf was not smiling. Her wolf was not settled. Her wolf was completely, perfectly, devastatingly still. The stillness of something that has stopped, finally, after a very long time, and recognized that it is exactly where it is supposed to be. Ask me, she said. The question. Ask me properly. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, stay, not for the work, not for the sessions, not because it's practical. His voice was very quiet. Stay, because your wolf found mine, and mine found yours, and I don't want to spend another day pretending that's not the most significant thing that has ever happened to me. A pause. Stay, because I want to learn how to grieve properly, and I think I need someone who already knows the way. Stay because I can bank a fire correctly, but apparently I never remember to, and you always fix it without being asked, and I... He stopped. Something crossed his face. The almost smile, but fuller this time. Real and unguarded and completely unlike anything she had seen on it in 8 days of watching it. I find that I very much want you to keep doing that. She laughed again, softer this time. That's not a compelling diplomatic argument, she said. No, he agreed. It's not. He looked at her. Is it enough? She looked at him, cracked open and steady-handed and frightened and asking. Yes, she said. It's enough. Something happened in his face. The thing behind the walls. The thing he'd been protecting and being protected from. It moved, shifted, not gone, but present in a way it hadn't been. He reached out. His hand, steady, warm, scarred across the knuckles, came up and he took her face in both his hands, carefully, like something he didn't want to drop, and he pressed his forehead to hers. Not a kiss. Not yet. Just contact. Forehead to forehead, in the cold courtyard, breathing the same air. Her wolf went so still it felt like the whole world had paused. I'm going to figure out how to let it go, he said, very quietly, against her forehead. The holding. I'm going to... I know, she said. It won't be. I know, she said again. Nora. What? Stop telling me you know things. Make me, she said. He laughed. Real, full, warm. A sound she had never heard from him before. A sound she suspected very few people had heard from him. And it was the most disarming thing that had ever happened to her. That laugh. In a week full of disarming things. She was smiling against his forehead. He was smiling against hers. In the cold courtyard of Dawnmere Keep, with the last of the summit carriages pulling through the gate, and Aldrich pretending very hard not to watch from the corridor window, the most feared alpha in the known world stood with his forehead pressed to a nobody unbound mediator's, and laughed like something that had been locked up for 3 years had just found the door. "Stay," he said again, softer. "I'm staying," she said. Chapter 9. The caravan didn't break quietly. Nothing that has been held that long ever does. She had been warned about the last storm. Her mother's healer had called it that, the last storm, and her mother had described it afterward as the strangest thing she had ever experienced. Not the worst, strange, the feeling of something enormous moving through you that had been still for so long you had forgotten it was there, and its movement was violent not because it wanted to hurt you, but because it was large and had been compressed, and release, when it finally came, was not gentle. "It will feel like breaking," her mother had said. But breaking isn't always damage. Sometimes it's just opening. Nora had held on to that word, opening, for the 11 days since the summit ended. 11 days of staying. She had stayed. It had not looked the way she'd imagined staying would look, in the abstract. She had imagined it as something she would settle into gradually, like a new coat worn until it shaped itself around her. Instead, it had felt immediate, not comfortable immediately, not easy, but real. She woke in the morning and she was in Dawnmere Keep, and that was not a temporary fact. She had her notes on the study desk and her books in the corner of the room that had become, without any formal designation, her room. Not the guest room 2 doors from the study. A room in the family wing, with a window that faced east and caught the morning light in a specific way she had started to depend on. She had her second cup of tea waiting every morning. He always drank it. They worked together in the study most days. She had taken on, without anyone particularly deciding this, the role of reviewing all incoming correspondence that required old tongue translation, which was more than she'd expected, and he had stopped pretending that he wasn't routing things to her desk on purpose. The work was real and substantial, and she was good at it, and she was starting to understand that this was part of what he'd meant when he said he wasn't asking her to give up her work. He'd been building her a version of it before she'd said yes. She had noticed this and not said anything about it for 4 days, and then on the 5th day she had said, "You were going to give me the correspondence work, regardless of what I answered in the courtyard." He had looked up from his desk. "Yes. So you had a contingency." "I had a hope," he said. "A contingency implies I was prepared for the alternative." She had looked at him for a long moment. "You weren't prepared for the alternative," she said. "No," he said. "I was not." She had gone back to her correspondence. But the nights were where the work happened. He still dreamed. Less often, not every night, and the dreams were different, shifted in their quality the way her mother had described, more turbulent but shorter, the last storm gathering itself. She had moved by the 2nd week without either of them discussing it, to staying in the study while he slept in the chair. Not always. Some nights she went to her room and he slept in his. And those nights he still rested better than he had for 3 years, the proximity of her in the building enough for his wolf to release the alert state. But some nights she stayed, and those nights the dreams came and passed faster, and he woke from them more cleanly. She had stopped sitting across the room on those nights. She sat in the chair beside his now, close enough that when the dreams came she could put her hand on his arm, or his hand, or his shoulder, whatever was nearest, and say his name quietly, and feel the exact moment his wolf registered her presence and came back from wherever the dream had taken it. She had learned the precise sound his breathing made at each stage of it. She had learned this the way you learned something you were going to need to know for a long time. It was on the 11th night that the last storm came. She heard it begin at the 2nd hour. She was in the chair beside his, reading, a habit she'd developed, bringing a book for the nights she stayed, giving her hands something to do and her eyes somewhere to go that wasn't watching him, when his breathing changed. She'd become so attuned to the change that she registered it before she consciously heard it, her body responding before her mind caught up. She set the book down. This was different. The dreams usually came in a specific pattern, a gradual build, the breathing changing, The hands tightening on the armrests, the low sound, the flinch if it went deep enough. Tonight the build was faster, more compressed. He went from sleeping to distressed in less than a minute, and the sound that came was not the low, rough half-word of previous nights. It was a name. Not one of the 11, not Sale or Oren or any of the names she now knew. Just a name, rough and broken at the edges, that she didn't recognize. Said the way you said a name in a dream when you were too late to do something. Kale, she said. His hands hit the armrests. Kale. She stood, went to him, put both hands on his, not one hand this time, both, covering his where they gripped the chair. You're here. I'm here. You're in the study. His whole body was rigid. Kale, he gasped. Not a quiet sound. A real one. The sound of someone surfacing from something deep. The specific sound of lungs that hadn't been drawing proper air finding it suddenly. His hands turned under hers and gripped. Not the armrests. Her hands. He gripped her hands with both of his, and she felt the force of it. Not painful but absolute. The grip of someone holding on to the only solid thing in a dissolving world. I've got you, she said. You're here. I've got you. His breathing was ragged. She could feel him, not just his hands, the whole of him, the trembling that ran through him like an aftershock, working to surface, working to separate the dream from the room. She kept her voice steady and her hands firm, and she said his name again and again, not desperately, just continuously. A sound he could follow back. It took longer than the other nights. A full minute, maybe more. And then his grip on her hands changed. From the desperate hold of someone clutching a rope to something else. Something that was still holding but differently. She felt the exact moment his breathing began to even. The exact moment the trembling started to subside. The exact moment his wolf registered her wolf and came back to itself. There, she said softly. You're back. He said nothing. She didn't move. She stayed crouched beside the chair with her hands in his. The fire long dead, the room dark except for the moonlight through the study window, and she waited. After a long time he said, It was different tonight. I know. I heard. The name. You don't have to. Tal, he said, rough. His name was Tal. He was my second in command before Aldrich. He stopped. A long pause. He was at the crossing. He was the one who brought me the intelligence report. The wrong intelligence. He spent 8 months after blaming himself, and I told him it wasn't his fault, that intelligence failures happened, that he couldn't have known. His voice was very quiet, and I believed that. For him, I believed it completely. She understood. But not for yourself, she said. No. A pause. He left the position 6 months after, moved his family to the Southern Territory. We still correspond. He has 3 children now. His hands were still in hers. I told him to let it go. I watched him do it. And I have spent 3 years being unable to do the same thing I told him was necessary. She was quiet for a moment. What did you say to him? She asked. Exactly, when you told him to let it go. He thought about this. I said, he paused. I said that carrying it wouldn't bring them back, that the debt he felt he owed them couldn't be paid in suffering, that the only way to honor them was to continue doing the work well, with clear eyes, and not to let the guilt corrupt his judgment. His voice was flat with the recognition of someone hearing their own words from the outside for the first time. I said all of that to him, and I believed every word. And then you went home and couldn't sleep. And then I went home and couldn't sleep. She let this sit for a moment. Kale, she said. He looked at her. In the moonlight she could see his face, fully open again. The armor dissolved the way it only dissolved in this room in the dark, and underneath it the exhaustion, and the grief, and the specific expression of a man who has just seen something clearly that he has been looking at sideways for 3 years. You know what to do, she said. You have always known what to do. You told Tal exactly what was true, and exactly what was necessary, and you were right. She held his gaze. The only person in the world you haven't been able to say it to is yourself. His jaw worked. Say it, she said softly. Not to me. Not because I'm here. Just say it. A long silence. She waited. The moonlight moved through the window. The keep was completely quiet around them. His hands were still in hers, warm and real, and holding on with a different quality now. Not desperate, not clutching, just connected. Carrying it, he said, slowly, as if finding each word separately in a dark room. Won't bring them back. A pause. The debt I feel I owe them can't be paid in suffering. He stopped. His eyes were very bright. The only way to honor them is to continue doing the work well, with clear eyes. His voice dropped, and not to let the guilt corrupt my judgment. Silence. He exhaled. Not a small exhale, not the carefully managed release of a man controlling his breath. A full, complete, devastating exhale, the kind that came from the bottom of the chest, from somewhere that had been compressed for a very long time, and it shook him slightly as it left. And then something happened that she had no words for and didn't try to find them. She felt it, not metaphorically, not in some abstract wolf sense way, but physically, in the air of the room, like a pressure change, like something that had been wound very tight for a very long time releasing. She felt it in her own chest, in her wolf, which went from its deep settled stillness to something that might have been described as resonance, the feeling of two things that had been vibrating at different frequencies, suddenly finding the same note. His wolf released. Not completely. She would learn later that the Kairava didn't break all at once, that it receded like a tide rather than snapped like a rope, that there would be more nights and more work and more naming before it fully resolved. But in this moment, in this dark study with the dead fire and the moonlight and her hands in his, something central to it gave way. She knew because he made a sound she had never heard from him. Not a word, not a name, just a sound, low and rough and completely unguarded, the sound of something very large setting down something very heavy after carrying it for a very long time. And then he was crying. Not dramatically, not the way grief looked in stories. Just, quietly, in the dark, with his forehead dropped to their joined hands, his shoulders working with the effort of it, the specific silent crying of someone who has not allowed themselves to cry about a thing for 3 years and has forgotten how to do it with any grace. She didn't say anything. She brought one hand up from their grip and placed it on the back of his head, gently, firmly, and she stayed there, present and real and not going anywhere. She let him cry. She let him carry it in water, the way she had described her mother doing it, still carrying it, but held up at the same time. She stayed, and she was the water, and she didn't make it mean anything beyond what it was, which was a man who had needed to do this for 3 years finally being in a place where it felt safe enough to. It lasted perhaps 5 minutes, maybe less, maybe more. She wasn't counting. When it was done, not resolved, not finished, but done for tonight, he straightened slowly. He didn't release her hands. He looked at her in the moonlight with the most unguarded expression she had seen on any face in her adult life, and she looked back at him without flinching. "I'm sorry," he said. Rough. "Don't," she said. "Nora, don't apologize for that," she said firmly. "Don't you dare apologize for that." He looked at her. "That was the beginning of it," she said. "That was the wolf starting to let go." She held his gaze. "You don't apologize for the beginning of healing." A long silence. Sael was 34, he said quietly. Yes. Oren was 22. She was going to teach in the spring. Yes. Bren and Win. He paused. Their father is a good soldier. He deserved. He stopped. They deserved to cross safely. Yes, she said. They did. I couldn't give them that. No, you couldn't. I'm sorry, he said, not to her, the dark room, to the names in it, to the specific shape of what was owed. I am sorry. She stayed quiet. He said it again, softer. Then he was quiet for a long time. His breathing had steadied. The trembling was gone. His hands in hers were warm and completely still, the stillness of genuine rest, of a wolf that had released the alert state not because it was tricked into it or soothed temporarily, but because something fundamental had shifted in what it was holding. Lie down, she said softly. The chair isn't... Stay, he said. Don't go to your room. She looked at him. I'll take the other chair, she said. No, he said, not commanding, just asking. Stay close. She looked at him for a moment. Then she stood, went to the window seat, a wide stone bench with a cushion that ran along the study's east wall, broad enough to sleep on if you were willing to use your arm as a pillow, and she settled there, facing the room, facing his chair. I'm here, she said. He looked at her across the room. The moonlight was between them, a pale band of it crossing the floor. I know, he said. He closed his eyes. She watched him. For the first time since she had known him, since the day she had looked up in a war hall and seen a man walking toward her carrying a weight she hadn't yet understood, his face was completely still. Not the stillness of a man controlling himself. The stillness of a man at rest. She stayed awake for a long time, watching him sleep, and her wolf was quiet in a way she had no words for. A quietness that was not absence but completion, the sound a thing makes when it has finally become what it was always going to be. She thought about her mother. She thought about her brother. She thought about way stations and center chairs and second cups of tea, and the specific weight of a man who had needed to be held up without being held, and had found, accidentally, someone who knew how. She thought, I did not expect this. Any of this. She thought, I'm glad I sat in the wrong chair. Then she closed her own eyes and slept. Chapter 10. The curse didn't break all at once, but when she opened her eyes, she knew something had. She woke to light. Not the gray pre-dawn light she'd become accustomed to in 11 days of early mornings at Dawnmere Keep. Real light. The particular pale gold of full morning. The kind that meant she had slept past dawn for the first time in recent memory. It came through the study's east window in a long flat band, crossing the floor, crossing the distance between the window seat and the fire chair. She lay still for a moment, orienting herself. Study, window seat. Her arm had gone slightly numb where she'd used it as a pillow. The fire was dead. Of course it was. It always was. He never remembered to bank it. And the room was cold in the specific morning way of stone buildings that had lost their heat overnight. Her book had fallen to the floor at some point. Her shoes were still on. She turned her head. He was asleep in the chair. Not restless asleep. Not the carefully maintained semi-consciousness she had watched him sustain for 11 nights. The sleep of a man whose wolf refused to fully release its vigilance. Deeply, completely, genuinely asleep, his head dropped to one side, his hands loose in his lap, his chest rising and falling with the slow, even rhythm of someone who had gone somewhere far down and stayed there. His face was still. She looked at his face for a long moment. She had looked at it many times over the last 11 days, in sessions and in the study, and across the desk in the early mornings, and in the firelight of late nights. She had catalogued it carefully. The strong jaw, the lines at the corners of his eyes, the particular quality of controlled attention that lived in it when he was working, the almost smile that appeared rarely and meant something each time. She had watched it carry exhaustion like a second skin, watched the exhaustion slowly lighten, watched things move through it that he didn't put into words because he was a man who had spent a long time not finding words for things. She had seen it open, last night, in a way she suspected very few people had ever witnessed. She looked at it now and thought, this is what he looks like without the weight. Not unrecognizable. Still him, the jaw, the lines, the structure. But lighter. The way a room looked lighter when you removed something large from it that you'd stopped noticing was there. The absence of the weight was its own presence. She sat up slowly, carefully, trying not to disturb the quiet of the room. He didn't wake. She stood, picked up her book from the floor, set it on the windowsill. She crossed to the fireplace and did what she always did, rebuilt the fire, methodically, kindling first, then the larger pieces, the familiar morning task that had become as habitual as the second cup of tea. She was placing the last piece when she heard his breathing change behind her. Not distress, the opposite of distress. The slow, graduated surfacing of genuine rest. She stayed at the fire. She heard him breathe in deeply. Heard the small sounds of a body taking stock of itself after sleep. A shift, a quiet exhale. A pause that was awake and aware rather than sleeping. You're rebuilding the fire, he said. His voice was rough with sleep, the the specific roughness of it that she had heard for 11 days, and that still did the thing to the air of the room that she had stopped pretending it didn't do. "You never bank it properly," she said, not turning around. "I know. It's a simple thing. You put the larger pieces." "Nora." "What?" "Turn around." She turned around. She turned around. He was awake, fully awake, more quickly than she'd ever seen him surface, as if the sleep had been so complete and real that it had left him clear rather than foggy. He was sitting forward in the chair, both feet on the floor, watching her with an expression she hadn't seen before. It took her a moment to identify it. Peace. Not contentment. She'd seen contentment on him in small moments, in the almost smile, in the dry humor that appeared when his guard was down. Not relief. She'd seen that too, on the mornings after a night where the dreams had been mild. This was different from both, quieter and larger at the same time. Peace. "How do you feel?" she asked. He thought about it seriously, in the way he did everything, not reaching for a functional answer but actually assessing. He turned his hands over, looked at them, flexed them once, looked back at her. "Like something is different," he said. "I don't have a more precise word than that." "Different how?" He thought again. "Like I put something down last night," he said slowly. "And I woke up, and it wasn't in my hands. And He paused. "I'm waiting for the panic of that, the reflex to pick it back up." He looked at her. "It's not coming." She sat in the fire chair, her chair now, the one that had shaped itself around her in 11 days, and looked at him. "It might come later," she said honestly. "The Karava doesn't resolve all at once. There will be days." "I know," he said. "I'm not saying it's finished. I'm saying—" He stopped, searched for it. "Last night I said their names. All of them. Not in my head. Out loud." He paused. "And then I said I was sorry. Out loud." Another pause. "And I think my wolf finally believed I meant it. Not as punishment. As—" He looked for the word. "As acknowledgement. There's a difference." She nodded slowly. "There is." "Aldrich is going to ask me how I am this morning," he said, with the dry edge that meant he was finding solid ground under him, the humor surfacing, as it always did when he was most grounded. "He asks every morning. He has been asking every morning for 3 years, and I have been saying fine every morning for 3 years, and he has been believing me less every morning for 3 years. What are you going to tell him today?" He looked at her. "Better," he said. Simply. She felt something warm move through her chest. Not her wolf this time, or not only her wolf, but something that was simply her, Nora, human and tired and slightly stiff from sleeping on a window seat, and more at home in this cold study than she had ever been anywhere. "Good," she said. He stood. She stood with him, the morning habit of it, both of them moving toward the day. He crossed to the desk, looked at the correspondence stacked there, and she picked up her notes from the table, and her book from the windowsill. They had almost reached the door, side by side, the distance between them, the specific close distance of two people who had stopped requiring space between themselves for reasons of principle. When he stopped, she stopped with him. He turned. He was looking at her with the layered expression, but the layers were different now, she noticed. The resistance that had always formed the surface of it was thinner, not gone but receded, like ice at the end of winter. What was under it was simply present. The thing that had been behind the walls for 3 years, looking out. "Can I tell you something?" he said. She waited. "I went and sat in the great hall yesterday morning," he said. "Before you were up. Early." She hadn't known this. "I sat in my chair," he said. "The center one. The one you stole on the first day. The almost smile. And I sat in the one beside it. The one you sat in for 8 days of the summit." He paused. "And I tried to— I don't know what I was doing, exactly. Remembering, maybe. The first day, before I knew who you were or what you were to my wolf. Just—" He paused. "I sat there and I thought about the fact that you were late and didn't know the rules and nobody managed to stop you in time and you just sat down, in the wrong chair." He looked at her. "And it changed everything." She looked at him. "I've been thinking about that a lot," he said. "About the randomness of it. What if you hadn't been late? What if someone had stopped you in the corridor? What if you'd sat somewhere else? He shook his head slightly. And I keep arriving at the same place, which is that I don't believe it would have been different. Not fundamentally. I think my wolf would have found yours regardless. He paused. I think we would have found each other anyway. The chair was just... He searched for it. Efficient, she offered. He laughed. The real one. The full warm one that she had heard for the first time in the courtyard, and had been filing carefully ever since. Efficient, he agreed. She smiled. He reached out and tucked a strand of her hair back from her face. A simple gesture, quiet and deliberate. The kind of gesture that was not a declaration, but was somehow more than one, was the kind of thing people only did when they had decided. She held very still for it, the way you held still for something you wanted to last. I'm going to keep saying their names, he said. Sael, Oren, Brannon Wynn's father. His name is Corin, did I tell you that? No. Corin, he said. I'm going to say their names, not to punish myself, because they were real, and they mattered, and they should be said. Yes, she said softly. And I'm going to sleep, he said. Actually sleep, not manage myself in increments. His eyes were on hers. Because I have a reason to now. She looked back at him steadily. You always had a reason, she said. You just needed the conditions. You are the conditions, he said. She held his gaze. I know, she said. He looked at her for a moment with that peace expression, the new one, the one she was going to spend a long time learning, and then he opened the study door. Aldrich was in the corridor. Of course he was. He was always in the corridor. She was beginning to suspect he slept there standing up, in the manner of horses. He looked at Cale, then at her, then at Cale. His expression did the thing it had been doing for 11 days. The rapid calculation, the rapid acceptance, the rapid cataloging. Alpha, he said. Aldrich, Cale said. How are you this morning? A pause. Better, Cale said. Aldrich looked at him for a long moment. Then something happened in his face, subtle, restrained, the expression of a man who had been managing someone he cared about through 3 years of watching them carry something too heavy and had just been told the weight had shifted. Good, Aldrich said. His voice was very even. Breakfast is in the East Room. The Northern General's correspondence arrived this morning. Nothing urgent. The IPC sent a formal resolution on the Veth complaint. He paused. Unanimously in your favor. Of course it was, Cale said. And, Aldrich said, looking at Nora, there are 2 new translation requests on your desk. The Eastern Archive sent them directly, which... He paused. That's the first time they've sent directly to a non-staff member. I thought you should know. She absorbed this. The Eastern Archive, the place that had offered her a position twice, and that she had turned down twice because it was where you went, after things had already happened. I'll look at them, she said. Aldrich nodded. He turned to go, and then paused, and turned back. Nora, he said. She looked at him. I'm glad you sat in the wrong chair, he said. She laughed. He walked away down the corridor with the expression of a man who had said exactly what he meant to say, and was satisfied with it. They had breakfast in the East Room. It was a small room she hadn't been in before, a morning room, she understood, the kind of space that large keeps had for informal meals, with windows on 2 walls and a table that seated 6, and a fire that someone had already built and banked properly, which was not Cale. The morning light came in at an angle that made the room feel warm even in the winter cold outside. She sat across from him. There was tea, there was bread, and there were eggs, and there was the particular quiet of a morning after something significant that has not yet been named, but is felt everywhere in the room. They talked about the IPC resolution, about the Eastern Archive's translation requests. She described them from Aldrich's brief mention, and he listened and asked questions about the old tongue dialects involved with the specific interest of someone who had learned, over 11 days, that this was something she loved. They talked about the Northern General's correspondence. They talked about the tributary rights and whether the Veth delegation would challenge the ruling before the spring thaw. Normal things, working things. Except that it was nothing like the working breakfasts she had sat through in 10 years of her professional life, and she knew it, and he knew it, and neither of them said so because they didn't need to. Halfway through the meal she looked up and found him watching her. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. The same answer he'd given in the great hall on the third day, and it meant the same thing it had meant then. Something, but not nothing. "I'm just not ready to say it yet." She went back to her tea. She smiled at the cup. Later, she would try to describe the thing that happened over the following weeks to herself, when she was alone and needed to make sense of it. She would reach for the language of transformation, changed, healed, resolved, and find it insufficient. Because transformation implied a before and after, a clean line between the person he had been and the person he became, and it wasn't like that. It was more like watching something return to itself. The Kairava receded in the way her mother's healer had predicted, not all at once, tied rather than rope, slow and steady, and marked by ordinary days punctuated by harder ones. There were nights when the dreams came back, and she was there, and she said his name, and he followed it back. There were mornings when he was quieter than others, and she didn't fill the quiet, and he found his way through it. There were days when he said one of the names out loud, not in grief, just in acknowledgement, the way you say the names of people who mattered, and she listened. And there were days, increasingly, when he didn't say the names because he had said them enough times now, that they lived somewhere more comfortable in him, when he slept through the night fully and woke clear, when his hands were steady all day, when the peace expression was simply his face. Aldrich, at the end of the third week, stopped asking how he was in the morning. He said, when she mentioned this, "Because I can see it now. I don't need to ask." One morning, 4 weeks after the summit, 5 weeks after she had sat in the wrong chair, she came to the study to find the fire already built and banked. Properly banked, the larger pieces placed correctly, the damper adjusted, the fire burning steadily in a way that would last through the morning. She stood in the doorway and looked at it for a long moment. He was at his desk, reading correspondence, and he did not look up, but there was something in the set of his shoulders, very slight, the quality of a person who is aware of having been observed noticing something, that told her he knew she was there and knew what she was looking at. She sat in her chair. She put her notes on the desk. She did not say anything. After a moment, without looking up from his correspondence, "I told you I knew how to bank a fire. You told me no such thing," she said. "You just never did it." "I needed the right motivation." She looked at him. He was reading his correspondence with the focused efficiency she had come to understand as his default mode when he was well, and there was nothing in his expression that was performing anything. He was simply present, here, in his study, in his keep, on an ordinary winter morning, banking fires and reading letters, and sitting across a desk from the person his wolf had found in a hall built for intimidation. She picked up her pen. She looked at the translation on her desk. The Eastern Archive request, a boundary document from the old wars. The ink faded to near illegibility on one side. She began to work. The fire burned steadily. Outside the window, the keep went about its morning. The distant sounds of the garrison, the household, the territory carrying on. Inside the study, the scratch of 2 pens on 2 desks, the occasional quiet exchange about a document, or a clause, or a question of old-tongue grammar. Nothing dramatic. Just 2 people in a room that had become, without a formal declaration or a specific moment she could point to, home. Her wolf was not smiling. It was not settled. It was not still in the way of searching, or still in the way of waiting, or still in the way of found. It was simply quiet. The specific, profound quiet of a thing that is exactly where it belongs, and has nothing left to look for, and nothing left to prove, and no distance left to close. She wrote her first line of translation. Outside, winter light moved through the window. Inside, the fire held. That evening, when the work was done, and the keep had gone quiet, and the winter dark had come down around the walls of Dawnmere, she was at the study window when she heard him cross the room behind her. He stopped beside her. They stood at the window together, looking out at the courtyard, the well at the center, the stone bench against the far wall where he had asked his question, the gate through which the summit carriages had left, and through which she had not left with them. "I want to tell you something," he said. She turned slightly. He was looking out the window, his profile clean in the low light. "Oren," he said. The healer, the one who was going to teach in the spring. Yes. I wrote to the Eastern Medical Academy last week, he said. The one she'd been accepted to. I've funded a teaching fellowship in her name. Any healer from an unaffiliated pack who wants to study there, full scholarship, annually. He paused. It won't be announced publicly. It doesn't need to be. She looked at him. That's not penance, she said quietly. That's honoring. Yes, he said. That's what I was trying to do. He turned then, and looked at her, and his face in the window light was the face of a man who had found, somewhere in the last 5 weeks, the beginning of how to carry something without being crushed by it. I'm going to do something for each of them, not all at once. Over time, things that are fitting, things that make the world slightly more like the world they deserve to live in. She looked at him for a long moment. That, she said softly, is the most like yourself you have ever sounded. He held her gaze. Then he did something that was not the forehead press in the courtyard, and was not the hand-holding in the dark, and was not any of the careful, deliberate, one-rung-at-a-time steps they had been climbing toward each other. He simply put his arms around her. Not dramatically, not desperately. The way you held something you had decided to hold, not because you were afraid of losing it, but because it was there, and real, and yours, and you had chosen it. She leaned into it. She leaned into it. Her head against his shoulder, the same shoulder she had leaned away from on the first day, the one she had spent the summit being aggressively professional about, the one her wolf had been gravitating toward since the moment he sat down beside her in a hall built for intimidation. His shoulder. She was aware, with a warmth that was both her wolf and entirely her own, that it fit precisely. You know, she said, quietly, into the fabric of his jacket, that this is where it started. His arms tightened slightly. My shoulder? My shoulder, she said. Technically, you were on mine first. A breath of laughter, warm against the top of her head. So it did, he said. Outside the window, the courtyard was dark and quiet. The well at the center caught a thread of moonlight. The bench against the far wall sat empty in the cold. Inside the study, the fire, properly banked, burning steadily, held its warmth against the winter. He was not the most feared alpha in the known world, in this moment. He was just a man who had learned to sleep again, who said 11 names out loud, who had started to build a fellowship for a healer who never got to teach, a man who had spent 3 years standing on the edge of something too heavy to carry, and had finally, set it down. And she was not a nobody unbound mediator. She was the woman who had sat in the wrong chair and stayed in the right place, who had learned the acoustics of a person's sleep and the language of their wolf, and the difference between guilt and grief, and the sound an exhale made when it carried 3 years of weight out of a chest that had been holding it too long. She was home. For the first time since a border crossing during the boundary wars, and a brother lost 2 years after, and 15 years of watching her mother dream. She was home, and she knew it, and it did not feel like a risk. It felt like the most solid thing she had ever stood on. Sleep tonight, she said. Yes, he said. Actually sleep. I will. And bank the fire before. Nora. What? He pressed his lips to the top of her head. Simple, warm, deliberate. I know, he said. She smiled into his shoulder. Outside, the winter dark held the keep. Inside, everything was quiet. And in the quiet, no weight, no hollow, no alert wolf standing vigil over a guilt it had carried, like a debt that couldn't be paid. Just the fire, just the light. Just 2 wolves who had found each other in a hall built for fear, and had built something else entirely in the rooms beyond it. Something that felt, for the first time in a long time, like enough. If this story found you at the right moment, if you've ever carried something too long, or forgotten you were allowed to want things, or sat in the wrong chair and ended up exactly where you were supposed to be, then you already know what Nora and Kale know. You don't have to let go all at once. You just have to let your wolf know it's safe to. Leave a comment below. Did you feel the last storm coming? And if you want more stories like this, you know what to do.